Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into a world where the quiet rustle of feathers meant more than just cleaning dust off a shelf. Imagine yourself in a misty medieval morning village, rooftops still matting together under dew. And you probably won't survive this unscathed if you can't handle a little tickle in public. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment with your location and local time. I want to know where you're tuning in and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a narrow dirt track that winds between timber-framed cottages and pigsties. The dawn air smells of damp straw roasting hearth smoke and something faintly acrid, probably the resins still smoldering in last night's embers. As your boots sink into the packed earth, you squint at the villagers gathering around a low wooden platform in the center of the village square. They clutch feather dusters, long shafts of wood crowned with plumes of goose or ostrich feathers, their fluffy tips glinting in the morning sun. You probably think feather dusters are for cleaning only, but here they symbolize a strange feathered justice meted out in broad daylight. One mainstream historical fact by the 13th century CE European village courts had developed a host of informal punishments for minor offenses often involving public humiliation or symbolic penance. Tonight, you'll witness one of the more peculiar therapies, tickling sinners into polite behavior. As you step closer, you see the local bailiff, a burly man in a teal jerkin, gesturing for a young smith's apprentice to step onto the platform. The boy's face is flushed russet. He trembles under curious gazes. One quirky tidbit: some medieval villagers believed that if a ticklish offender lost control and laughed too heartily, it meant the punishment was cleansing, ridding him of wickedness, much like a baptism, except wetter and more involuntary. Historians still argue whether these feather duster penalties originated as genuine deterrents or were simply elaborate spectacles meant to shame trivial wrongdoers. Either way, the apprentice's wide eyes flicker between hope and dread. You notice that the bailiff's assistant, an older woman in a moss-green wimple, holds a wicker basket containing additional feather dusters, some trimmed with bright dyed feathers in indigo or scarlet, others left plain. Villagers whisper among themselves, gossiping tradespeople, midwives gossiping about a missing goat, and even the parish miller sharing his latest crumb-crusted bread scandal. Each offense, no matter how small, insulting your neighbor's hen, letting your pig wander into a stranger's turnip patch, could warrant a few strokes with a soft plume across the soles of one's feet or under one's arms. You can almost feel the collective tension as neighbors judge whether the punishment fits the crime. The bailiff clears his throat and the square falls silent except for a distant crow's caw. He brandishes the first feather duster, its handle carved with simple designs, iron fire tongs carved into the wood, perhaps a reference to forging or heat. He says, "Step forward, Joran, and face your peacocked penance." The smith's apprentice, whose name is Joran, shakily climbs the wooden steps, the boards creaking under his weight. A few villagers chuckle nervously. No one wants to witness real pain, but the tickle-induced humiliation is part punishment, part cautionary tale. You side-eye the bailiff's assistant, who gently instructs Joran to remove his leather boots a measure to expose his bare feet and make the tickling more effective without drawing blood. Once Joran gingerly removes his boots, the bailiff beckons him to turn, lifting his pant legs just above his ankles. Deputies hold Joran's hands behind his back, pinning his elbows to prevent him from flailing, lest the ritual turns chaotic. Now the bailiff sinks the duster's feathery tips into Joran's soles. At first, the plumes barely graze his skin, delicate as butterfly wings. A fringed detail emerges. Old wives once whispered that tickling with goose feathers would confuse mischievous sprites, keeping them from causing nighttime havoc. Whether that's true or not, it certainly amuses the onlookers. Joran's legs convulse in silent fits. He bites his lip to stifle his laughter, turning beet red in the process. The team's grip on his arms is gentle but firm, gentle enough to avoid actual harm, firm enough that no escape is possible. You feel a flush of empathy creeping up your spine because holding someone ticklish can feel more invasive than any scourge. The absurdity of using feather dust as tools meant to sweep away dust and odors as instruments of public penance creates a surreal tableau punishment softened by feather's gentle brush, yet sharpened by collective scrutiny. You watch Joran's face, straining to remain composed, but his shoulders shudder, and a high-pitched chuckle escapes him. The villagers hold their breath as he sways, trying to suppress the thrill of laughter and shame. Each tickle stroke a deliberate count of 10, as instructed by local custom, makes the punishment feel choreographed, deliberate like a dance of social correction. Observing this, you might imagine a modern-day traveler with a GPS app thinking, "This is ridiculous. I'd rather pay a fine." Yet, in medieval villages, gold or silver coins were scarce, and fines could bankrupt families. So instead, feather duster penance worked as a communal corrective. No one left empty-handed, but everyone left knowing that laughing his way through embarrassment could be a more memorable lesson than a whispered scolding. The bailiff's assistant steps forward, holding a second duster trimmed with russet feathers. She sprinkles a drop of scented rose water onto its tips, an aromatic gesture meant to add a fragrant layer to the experience, a subtle reminder that this is as much sensory as it is punitive. While Joran's knees wobble, the bailiff calls out, 10 strokes for gossiping about Mistress Hilda's lateness. The crowd tut's gossip is considered a wrench in the social fabric, eroding trust. Historians still argue whether these feather duster rituals actually repressed gossip or simply gave villagers new anecdotes to share while they gathered at evening fires. You notice Mistress Hilda, her own feathers positioned proudly upon her bonnet, folding her arms trying to disguise a mischievous grin. Perhaps she believes that every giggle from Joran enriches her own tale. As the 10th tickle concludes, Joran is released. His face flushed tears of relief in his eyes. He catches his breath, glancing around to see if any friends are laughing at his plight. The bailiff nods in approval and gestures for Joran to retrieve his boots, allowing him to shuffle off the platform with his head hung low. The square remains hushed for a moment, then villagers burst into murmured conversation. Was 3 strokes too lenient? Would 5 more have been appropriate? The communal aspect is palpable each onlooker participates in the ritual, affirming shared morals and reinforcing social norms. From where you stand, you can almost taste the tension that lingers as the square's buzz picks up again. The bailiff turns to address the next offender, a harried-looking weaver accused of dumping dye water into the stream. She is led forward in russet, her loom shuttle still dangling from her belt. The bailiff raises a plain feather duster for her, declaring 10 strokes for fouling the water. The weaver's lips part in a resigned sigh as she removes her woolen boots and braces for the gentle assault. Her hands grip the wooden railing, fingers white with needed courage. The weaver's predicament underscores another facet. Feather duster punishments are as much about environmental responsibility as gossip control. One mainstream historical fact: medieval villagers depended on communal waterways for drinking, bathing, and watering livestock, so contaminating a stream was a grievous offense. Punishment with a feather duster was considered a proportional humiliation that discouraged others from repeating the offense without undermining the local economy by removing the weaver from her essential workplace. Still, the decreed humiliation hinged on public scorn and the knowledge that word would spread beyond the village boundaries. As the bailiff's assistant flicks the duster's fluffy tips against the weaver's bare skin, she coughs in suppressed surprise, attempting to maintain dignity as villagers titter at her plight. One fringe tidbit: some folklore claimed that weavers' hands were too calloused to feel ticklish, but last night's starlit trial proved otherwise. The weaver's starchy linen shift rises slightly with every suppressed chuckle, and for a fleeting moment you envision her as a jester, resisting each stroke as if it were a comedic performance rather than punishment. You sense the tension in the air brake when the weaver's laughter resonates, echoing off the timber frames and thatched roofs. The crowd relaxes, the collective scowl dilutes into sympathetic smiles. Her final steps away from the platform come with nods of understanding, an unspoken message that we're all flawed and that even our scuffs in communal life warrant a light-hearted, if uncomfortable, remedy. Later, as the square empties and midday light warms the rooftops, you can't help but reflect on that scholarly debate phrase swirling in the tavern gossip. Historians still argue whether villagers employed 4 or 5 strokes for repeat offenders. You recall hearing heatedly just last night under ale lantern glow. It's a reminder that every tale, every penalty, even one as seemingly frivolous as tickling with feathers, is subject to interpretation and modification. Here, community memory molds strictness. Some believe a second duster for habitual gossips was necessary, while others claim it veered into cruelty, masked as entertainment. A hush falls on the empty square, and you catch a whiff of roasting mutton from a nearby hearth. A medieval pastry shopkeeper leans out of his window, wiping sweat from his brow, and beckons you with a warm, flour-dusted hand spiced pies. Sir, he calls, testing your resolve after all that public tickling. You step closer, mindful of that lingering embarrassment on your cheeks, and grin, ordering a slice. One quirky detail drifts into your mind. Village bakers sometimes hid tiny feather charms in sweet pastry, believing that nibbling a bit of feather luck made you immune to the next morning's tickle penalty. You chuckle to yourself as you take a bite the honey and spice, comforting in an oddly modern way. You wonder whether such pastries actually existed or were just another tale to distract from the real sting of being the square's next feathered spectacle. By the time you finish your spiced pie, the sun rides higher and the square's afternoon hush settles into a lazy buzz. Neighborhood children weave between goats and carts, reenacting the morning's tickle rituals with miniature feather dusters made from bird down and wooden twigs. They jostle and laugh, chasing each other in a game that mocks authority and yet enforces communal norms. Giggle if you can't resist, but keep it safe and mild. You wander past a small apothecary, its shelves lined with dried herbs, thyme, lavender, and something called tickleweed, rumored to cause a mild itching sensation if sprinkled on someone's feet. A sly label hangs above one jar. Feather Repel Potion, guaranteed to save you from unintended public tickles. You lift the tiny bottle and read the scribbled note. Mix equal parts goat's milk and rosemary oil. Ladle onto soles at dawn. Whether it works, nobody's sure, but under the desert sun of speculation, you decide it's worth a try next time. After all, who wouldn't want a little extra protection against the feathered justice of their neighbor? As you prepare to leave the village square, the midday sun beating on your shoulders, a sense of communal warmth lingers in your mind. The morning's feather duster rituals, though absurd at first glance, reveal something essential, that medieval villagers used these gentle humiliations as a form of social glue binding. Everyone, magistrates, blacksmiths, weavers, and bakers, in a dance of accountability and compassion. You recall that each tickle, each whispered prayer to Sheikh al-Barouj, each shared spiced pie knits the tapestry of communal solidarity. In a world where a simple feather can both shame and soothe you, sense that the true purpose wasn't cruelty, but a reminder that in the desert of human life, we all need to lean on one another, begrudgingly tickled or not. You trudge onward down a rutted path, leaving the market square's aftermath behind and entering the half-lit hush of early morning. Goblets of mist still hover above stagnant puddles by wooden fences, and the scent of damp moss mingles with the residual tang of last night's hearth smoke. The memory of feather duster pennant still tingles in your fingertips, but now you're about to discover how these curious punishments originated in local traditions long before today's spectacle unfolded. Imagine a time when these villages, small clusters of thatched roofs and meager crofts, carved their own justice rituals out of necessity, not imagination. You probably think a feather duster is meant only for sweeping cobwebs, but in these parts it once symbolized a tool of moral maintenance. As you walk, you glimpse a weathered signage nailed to a barn door, feather by foul folly by foot. It's a remnant of an old saying from the neighboring hamlet, hinting that feathered punishments began when a rogue goose invaded a lord's orchard, pecking at ripening apples until they rotted. The villagers, infuriated yet voraciously creative, caught the goose, plucked its feathers, and used them to tickle the offender's feet, hoping to quell future orchard raids. One mainstream historical fact, by the 12th century CE, goose husbandry was common in European villages, and the droppings fertilized fields, making geese both pests and valued providers. Historians still argue whether the original goose-driven punitive act came from Normandy or Brittany, but either way, The trickle-down effect led local peasants to improvise feathered retributions for petty crimes. You tilt your head, picturing villagers gathered in a barnyard wielding goose-plucked dusters, while the guilty were pinned by pitchforks, an image half charming, half chilling. In another hamlet farther east, rumor has it that a cunning widow outwitted a band of thieves who tried to raid her chicken coop. Instead of calling the local bailiff, she freed 100 roosters at dawn, cackling as the thieves fled in terror. Later, she gathered rosemary and lavender petals, stuffed them into small pouches, and tickled each would-be thief's palms, believing that laughter could shame them into honesty. This local lore, though perhaps embellished, birthed a fringe belief. Midwives once sprinkled crushed lavender on goose feathers to ward off malevolent spirits conjured by wrongdoing. You shake your head, half laughing at the notion of lavender-tinged tickling solving spiritual imbalance, but you tuck the idea away as potential nighttime reading fodder. Such tales, part myth, part anecdote, provided fodder for communal lawmaking. As you round a bend, the path slopes toward a cluster of humble huts where an old cobbler named Brunhild tends her forge. Her apron is streaked with soot and ash, and she greets you with a knod hammer resting on her workbench. Villagers wave and offer small blessings as you pass. Good morning, traveler. Watch your step, morning dew makes the ground slick. You recall that cobblers often facilitated the early codifications of local customs, recording infractions in their ledgers when not mending soles. Nearby, a hand-drawn sketch of a goose perched atop a feather duster still decorates her hut's eave. Brunhild once helped administer tickle-based censure when neighbors argued over stolen leather hides. One looter caught holding a bundle at midnight became the first official recipient of a 3-duster tickling in that hamlet's memory. She murmured as she hammered feathers taunt, but none can escape the truth in laughter. You dig your fingers into a pocket that holds a chipped wooden token, Brunhild's gift for oral history, etched with goose feather symbols and swirling lines. It's a curious relic, a talisman of village memory that confers permission to retell these odd customs. Venturing further, you come to an earthen enclosure where villagers keep geese and ducks. The plaintive squawk of a stray goose echoes as it waddles alongside a wooden gate. Nearby, 2 children sneak a peek at the water trough where ducks paddle lazily, their feathers slick. You remember that in certain communities, feather duster punishments were formalized during harvest season when stolen grain or spilled ale threatened the communal larder. One quirky detail a traveling monk once recorded in his chronicle, that a drunken laborer caught spilling ale into the field was tickled with a duck's down, but only after the duck's underbelly was dipped in stale ale, a punishing twist that left the offender writhing and sticky. You shiver at the notion sticky tickling sounds worse than it should, and discount it as an embellished anecdote, but it underscores how intertwined feather-derived penalties were with agricultural cycles. You trudge onward through a small grove of juniper trees whose berries release a crisp, resinous scent underfoot. The hazy morning light filters through their branches, painting the path in shifting patterns of light and shadow. You find a weathered stone marker topped with a carved feather motif, an ancient waypoint indicating the feather of justice gathering spot. Locals still use it as a place to deposit minor petitions. A mother might leave a scrap of parchment pleading for a neighbor to stop letting pigs root in her garden, and by night, someone would preside over the complaint using feathered judgments. The marker's carving, hard to decipher now, once displayed intricate Celtic knotwork, interwoven with stylized goose silhouettes. One mainstream historical fact, carved markers and crosses were common in medieval Europe to demarcate communal lands or sacred spaces. But a feather-carved marker was unique to regions where feathered punishments had gained cultural traction. Historians still argue whether such markers signified legal jurisdictions or served as talismanic warnings to potential transgressors. This one, weathered though it is, exudes a tribal solemnity, a silent oath that no matter how small the offense, communal order must prevail. Hushing your steps, you pause near a shallow public well carved from stone, its circular brim encircled by smashed barley husks, leftover fodder for animals. A group of elderly villagers sit beside it, their heads draped in indigo and russet cloths. They nod quietly as you approach. You share a respectful greeting. Peace be upon you, and settle near them, lifting the well's wooden bucket to fetch a sip of fresh, cool water. As the bucket descends, you hear murmurs of last week's duster trial. A baker accused of adding too little yeast to his loaves, thus selling heavy, inedible bread to the poor. The Bakers' Guild elders, known for their severe standards, ordered a public tickling 20 strokes of a goose feather duster across the baker's armpits, cited as appropriate penance to remind bakers to be generous with their yeast. One fringe belief held that if a baker survived 20 tickles without crying out, his bread would come out fluffier in the oven that night. The baker, still snickering at the notion, coveted this test, though the humiliating scene left him red-faced and determined. The well water tastes like secrets crisp and ancient, swirling in your mouth, a liquid bookmark in this living history. You recall that public wells served as hubs of gossip and communal decision-making in medieval times. One mainstream historical fact, by the 15th century CE, municipal wells often doubled as informal meeting places where local officials announced edicts, heard disputes, and handed out punitive measures for minor crimes. Here, near this stone well, villagers debated whether tickling punishments should be replaced by monetary fines or replaced by nailing tongue tassels to the condemned, an archaic custom where criminals had feathers tied to their tongues to inhibit speech. Historians still argue whether tongue tasseling ever truly existed or survived only in oral lore. Observing the villagers, you sense that centuries-old debate still flickers among them, feathers of the tongue or feathers of the foot. In any case, both methods indicate an underlying faith in tactile, sensory-driven corrections rather than purely material fines. Rising from the well, you resume your walk past a thatched meeting hall, a simple timber structure where villagers convened every Midsummer's Eve to celebrate and deliberate. Its front facade bears a carved relief of a large feather duster crossed with a wooden mallet representing balance, soft persuasion with firmness. Inside, on chipped benches, local magistrates once presided over disputes with feather-topped rods as their symbols of authority. One magistrate insisted The duster's softness reminded him of mercy, even as it tickled miscreants into compliance. You stand before the open doors watching a pair of young apprentices scurry inside to sweep yesterday's muck. Their brooms are straw-wrapped, not feathered, but you imagine them soon graduating to actual feather dusters for their own apprenticeships. First you learn to clean, then you learn to convict one old hand, murmured to you. The apprentices glance at you, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness, as though they've heard tales of your travels, introducing digital devices to tickle age-old customs. You step into the hall's dim interior where stale straw mats lie in neat rows and a high window's light streams through illuminating motes, dancing in the dusty air. A long bench along the far wall holds a variety of feather dusters, some with plumes of goose, others with ostrich or peacock feathers, each color-coded for severity. Scarce tumbleweed debris clusters in corners left by helpers. The hall's beams bear scorch marks, reminders of how flickering torchlight once danced during midnight tribunal sessions. One fringe detail villagers claimed that feather dusters made from peacock feathers were the most potent, in that the eye-like patterns instilled fear in witnesses, an aesthetic intimidation meant to balance the ticklish humiliation. Whether peacock dusters actually deterred crime or simply added ostentation to the ritual remains contested among local scholars. As you pick up a duster's handle, still smooth from repeated use, you imagine yourself in one of those midnight tribunals, the air thick with anticipation, your judgment balanced between mercy and spectacle. In those days, a petty thief might be brought before a small fire inmates flickering in torchlight until a tribunal of elders decided whether his offense warranted a public tickling or a thicker oak cudgel. One mainstream historical fact, by the late medieval period, village elders often wrote codes of mercy that specified which sins merited tickle-based penance versus more severe beatings. These codes, painstakingly copied by local scribes, feature in a few surviving manuscript fragments. Historians still argue whether those codes were widely enforceable or largely symbolic, an ivory tower recital, rather than an everyday reality. Yet standing here, you sense that the spirit of those codes echoes in every feathered tip you touch. You close the duster's chest and step back outside, resolved to continue your journey. As you pass the meeting hall's threshold, you overhear a hush of laughter and see a group of children playfully tickling each other behind a stack of barrels, an informal, impromptu reenactment of village justice. The children's giggles carry across the dusty courtyard, blending innocence with inherited tradition, as though learning from a living tapestry of communal memory. It's both charming and unnerving to see how even the youngest villagers adopt feather duster customs as part of their cultural bedrock. Better you learn to laugh through it now than face a full tickle tribunal later. An older boy calls to his younger sister, brandishing a stray peacock feather. You resume your trek, leaving the meeting hall, and well behind, footsteps echoing softly on the uneven pebbles. Birds chirp in the treetops beyond the high hedgerow, their songs a stark contrast to the rustic justice you're delving into. The path narrows as you approach a low knoll, once the site of a communal slaughterhouse where stray livestock were butchered and communal feasts prepared. Now the smell of roasting goats and a dozen other meats drifts on the breeze, reminding you that the village's harshness with feeble plumes coexists with their capacity for generosity. After all, while they employed feathers to shame wrongdoers, they also used their meat to feed widows and orphans during cold months, a communal balance of justice and charity. At the knoll's crest, you pause looking out over rolling fields where barley grows in neat furrows, golden stalks swaying gently. Nearby, a shepherd tends a small flock of sheep, their woolly backs flecked with stray barley chaff. You recall hearing that shepherds often carried small handheld feather dusters to gently brush burrs from their sheep's coats, then repurpose those same dusters for rounding up stray villages when needed. That tidy utilitarianism, using a single tool for both care and censure, epitomizes medieval resourcefulness. You let out a soft chuckle at the absurdity. One moment you groom sheep, the next you reform sinners. The line between gentle care and public chastisement blurs in these fields. Beside the barley furrows stands a weathered wayside shrine, its figure of St. Crispin half eroded by wind and rain. Pilgrims used to stop here seeking protection for their shoes and leather goods, especially cobblers working long hours. By tradition, villagers would suspend a feather duster from the shrine, offering it to travelers as a symbol of mercy and safe passage. In return, travelers would leave small coins or talismanic scripts. One fringe tidbit local legend claims that when a traveler accepted the duster, he gained 3 days where no itch or tickle could reach him. An absurd superstition, but one that gave comfort. You glance at the shrine, imagining a weary pilgrim touching the feather for reassurance before stepping into the desert's next stretch. You move on, passing through a stand of gnarled olive trees whose silvery leaves glint in the morning sun. The ground underfoot is littered with fallen olives, their skins split to reveal creamy flesh. A lone charcoal burner puffs out blue-gray smoke in the distance. He's making charcoal for the next winter's fires. Charcoal burners often doubled as local informants, trading gossip for firewood, and they occasionally advised local foot patrols on who to feather duster next. Their smoky dwellings, half hidden among trees, serve as reminders that even the humblest crafts had mouths full of judgment. You wonder if any charcoal burner's pet parrot could recite the names of every offender who laughed beneath a feather's touch. As you round the final bend, the path reveals a simple wooden sign marking the boundary of the next village. Inked words now faded but still legible. Enter Feather Court jurisdiction. The sign stands sentinel at the end of a row of flax fields, their pale blue blossoms nodding in the warm breeze. You inhale the crisp scent of flax, mingling with the faint promise of rain on the horizon. One mainstream historical fact, neighboring regions litigated fiercely over jurisdictional rights and signage. Like this was crucial to prevent cross-border tickle disputes. Would a traveler caught in one village's net be sent back to another? For tickling, historians still argue whether territorial boundaries effectively prevented such confusion. But this sign marks your entry into another realm of feather duster law. You step beneath the sign's arch and feel a tingling thrill you're about to witness how another community miles from the one you just left has woven its own unique traditions around feathers, laughter, and social order. The patchwork of customs you've encountered so far hints at endless variations, some more draconian, others more playful. Ahead, beyond the flax fields and a shallow stream, the next village awaits. Its feather duster rituals once kept unscrupulous millers honest and kept slipperiness from turning into scandal. As you proceed, you sense the vast tapestry of medieval life stretching onward, each village thread weaving a different motif of justice through the very rivers of time. You trudge forward, the morning sun warming your back as laughter echoes faintly on the wind remnants of feathery justice, from afar beckoning you deeper into another chapter of quills, grains, and communal bonds. Each step carries you further into the legacy of feather dusters, both symbolic and practical, reminding you that in the medieval world, even the softest touch carried profound consequences. You trudge back into the village's bustling heart, where the market stalls have begun to stir with morning activity. Wooden buckets clatter, wicker baskets sway, and the scent of smoked herring mingles with fresh baked bread, creating a sensory tapestry that feels almost overwhelming after yesterday's solemn rituals. Yet today morning light brings a different kind of ritual, the village stakeout. Imagine the crisp tang of hay, the lilt of a tinkling bell over the butcher's cart, the low hum of gossip already buzzing around the square. You're about to witness how medieval villagers enacted public humiliation, not with clubs or stocks, but with feather dusters, delicate tools of moral insistence pried from hearths and barn lofts. You probably think that kind of tickling is reserved for baby giggles, but in this place, silky feathers serve as instruments of social correction. It's like getting a polite slap with a marshmallow, but wrapped in the stares of your neighbors. Ahead, you see the bailiff's platform, a raised wooden dais draped in faded teal cloth. Its posts adorned with bundles of goose down tied by russet cord. A few onlookers stand shoulder to shoulder, whispering and nudging each other while traders haggle over barley prices. Stallholders pause mid-haggle, their hands dangling over crates of apples or fish, and eye the platform with the same anticipation they reserve for harvest festivals. You think of last night's starlit navigation, where Polaris guided you safely across dunes, and now Polaris seems to whisper that no one escapes Feather Court. One mainstream historical fact: by the 13th century, CE European village courts often met at midday markets to maximize witness presence, ensuring collective judgment. Historians still argue whether midday gatherings were strictly for communal engagement or simply a convenient excuse to enforce small-scale justice while everyone was already congregated. The bailiff today is a lanky figure in a moss-green tunic, his sash tied with a small carved bone talisman shaped like a goose's head, vulnerary magic, some say, embedding a warning as well as protection. Beside him stands the bailiff's assistant, a spry young woman in a saffron kerchief, clutching a wicker basket of dusters, some trimmed in peacock feathers, others in plain goose plumes, each hinting at escalating levels of humiliation. The bailiff's voice cuts through the square's chatter. Order! This morning's offenders step forth and face your peacocked penance. It's a declaration that shifts the crowd's energy from casual trade to courtly theater. You shuffle forward, weaving between a wooden barrel stacked with cider jugs and a cart heaped with root vegetables, each footstep crunching on stray chaff. At the front of the platform, two villagers stand awaiting judgment. A raggedly dressed shepherd accused of overcharging for lamb pelts, and a flatteringly robed haberdasher suspected of selling miscolored ribbons. They wear collars of coarse flax, a subtle visual cue that they stand indicted. The bailiff spares them no sympathy as he addresses the shepherd first. You doubled the price of lamb skins when livestock was scarce. Offend we shall with feathers. The shepherd's face twists in dismay. He straightens a russet cloak that's too fine for his station and awkwardly removes his leather boots, revealing bare, calloused feet. One quirky fringe detail: some shepherds carried tiny vials of oil distilled from mandrake root, believing that anointing their souls before a tickling would dull feather sensitivity, an arcane trial that rarely succeeded, but provided enough confidence to at least face the dais without wincing. The bailiff's assistant holds up a peacock feather duster with its proud eye-like patterns glowing iridescent in the sun. You imagine trying to swat flies with a peacock feather. Difficult, yes. But here, that very feather oozing opulence symbolizes the shepherd's fall from grace. The bailiff instructs him to climb the platform steps and position himself facing east, each foot atop a marked stone, footmark 1 and footmark 2, carved by a local mason months ago. The shepherd complies, stepping gingerly on the stones and tracing the tactility of each grain beneath his soles, a faint reminder that every audience member will judge his vulnerability. You notice the faint sheen of sweat on his brow and recall last night's memory. He was the one who led your caravan astray by following a phantom reflection, causing you to nearly sink into a dune. So perhaps his penance is a type of karmic realignment. Once the shepherd's feet are firmly on the stones, the bailiff nods to the assistant. She advances, duster poised with gentle severity, and begins the first stroke across the shepherd's left sole. At first, the feather's touch is no more than a whisper, softer than a tongue flicking across mint leaves. The shepherd's knees jerk involuntarily, his arms flailing in a vain attempt to maintain dignity. A surprised jolt of laughter escapes him, sounding absurdly high-pitched in the hushed square. The crowd leans in, eager to see what emerges when authority merges with feathered penance. 20 strokes are called for, yet often the count stops when the offender begs for mercy, laughter surrendering to shame, a spectacle that satisfies communal thirst for justice. One villager clutching a wooden bucket murmurs to his neighbor, "I hear that laughter echoes on stone blocks for days, an endless reminder." Another nods, adding, "Feathers bruise the soul more than the skin." This mixture of pity and vindication weaves through the onlookers, reminding you that public punishment was as much about social theater as it was about correction. You lean forward, catching the smallest detail. The bailiff's assistant has begun rinsing the peacock feathers in water from a small basin beside the dais, a symbolic rinsing of impurity, as she prepares for the next offender. You recall a fringe belief that dipping feathers in holy water would amplify their potency, spiritual and ticklish. The shepherd's laughter intensifies. He tries to clamp his mouth shut, but a full-blown cackle escapes and tears glint in his eyes. You can practically taste the tension dissolving as his laughter ripples outward, every guffaw a release valve letting village stress escape. After the verdict's 10th stroke, the bailiff proclaims, "Enough." The shepherd's arms lower his chest, heaving in relief and residual embarrassment. He steps off the platform, his feet still tingling as he pulls his boots back on, head bowed, but shoulders eased. The bailiff addresses the crowd. "Let this be a lesson, no unjust profiteering in our domain." The villagers murmur in approval, murmuring "aye," and so it should be as they resume trading, their minds now quieter about fleece and fish. Next, the haberdasher, a dandy in russet doublet, ascends the platform. His silk-lined boots slide off, revealing pale feet unaccustomed to tickles. He adjusts, his saffron sash flashes a smirk as though he can hold back laughter, and crosses his arms. The bailiff's assistant, swapping peacock feathers for plainer goose plumes, steps forward. The dull brown feathers signal a lesser offense, though still enough to provoke communal censure. One mainstream historical fact punishments were tiered fine cloth or silk sellers often received less severe public humiliation than bread bakers whose loaves sustained the village. Historians still argue whether these tiers were based on actual social harm or guided by each community's economic structure. The first goose plume glides along the haberdasher's instep, an almost mundane touch, until his ankle jerks outward in instinctive reflex. He forces a tight-lipped smile, fighting the urge to laugh. After all, in his world of fine fabrics and high collars, losing composure can cost clientele. Yet, as the second feather skims, his other soul-suppressed giggles erupt, turning into full-throated laughter that surprises even him. You remember a callback when the shepherd laughed. You could see his humility soften. Now the haberdasher's laughter smooths his haughty edges, a leveling effect that transcends class. He's subjected to 15 strokes each, one measured methodically by the bailiff's assistant reciting 1, 2, 3, until the haberdasher surrenders his final breath of dignity. The crowd shifts, some whisper about needing more feathers next time, others note how the act fosters empathy. Even Tom, the haberdasher, can feel shame, one woman remarks to her child. As the dust settles, figuratively, not literally, a hush envelops the square as the bailiff raises his hand. Let these punishments bind our community together with equitable consequences, he intones. That solemn proclamation caps the morning's stakeout ritual. Petty thieves, price gougers, and gossip mongers have all had their tickle-correcting moments. You feel the square's pulse, slow market traders once again haggling over cheese rounds and buckles. A stray child picks up a discarded feather from the dais eyes, wide with the wonder of the tool that once laid bare adult foibles. You linger at the edge of the square, the hum of village life resuming around you, wood turners shaping handles for new dusters, women trading herbs for antiseptics to soothe tickle-induced welts, and farmers hauling carts of turnips past. A baker hands out tiny, crumbly biscuits to bystanders, softening any lingering sourness. You watch, comforted by the knowledge that after every feathered admonition comes a communal cup of mead, an unspoken pact that penance ends with conviviality. In your pack, you feel the heft of Brunhild's wooden token, a silent companion that whispers, "Remember this moment," the blend of justice and laughter. As you gather yourself to move on, the bailiff's assistant passes behind you, clutching the basket of dusters, now neatly stacked for the next session, her eyes flicking with both duty and a hint of reluctance. She's part of a chain of judgment and mercy wielding feathers that can shame but also unite. You take a deep breath, inhaling that blend of roasting herring fresh bread and damp earth medieval life's sensory tapestry woven in the market square. The dawn's earlier hush gives way to renewed chatter, merchants discussing cloth buys, travelers swapping news of distant towns, and toddlers weaving around chicken coops. The morning's feathery penances have imprinted a lesson on every shoulder. Here laughter and humility, wielded gently, can serve justice where a heavy hand might fail. As you step away from the square, crossing a small brook that trickles past a flax-woven footbridge, the sound of running water feels like a gentle exhale washing away the morning's sharp edges. Ahead lies the ribbon of road leading out of the village, beckoning you toward the next community's customs. As you trudge along dusters secured in woven satchel loops, you recall last night's swirling debates under candlelight. Did Goose's feather court originate in Brittany or Normandy? And realize that as long as villagers cherish these rituals, the debates will never cease. Each community will carry its own spin on who deserves a tickle and why. Yet you're grateful for the morning's vivid lesson. Even in harsh times, a simple feather can stitch together society's frayed threads with laughter and a touch of mild torment. As your boots sink into the sun-warmed soil, already dusty from midday's sun, you feel the current of history ripple beneath your feet. Each village, each courtyard, each market square adds another stitch to the grand tapestry of feathered folk justice. And you're mere inches away from the next community's variant of this ticklish tradition, eager to see whether they'll employ goose, ostrich, or perhaps even peacock plumes in their own brand of feathered pennants. You step into the village's barrowed side street where the sun's heat has baked the cobblestones to a dull orange glow. The smell of fresh bread from the baker's stall drifts over, mingling with the tang of livestock sweat. Here life's rhythm pulses with both routine and tiny infractions. Broken pots, spilled ale-stray livestock that burrow into communal order like pebbles beneath a wagon wheel. You're about to delve into which offenses merit a feather duster's dance across bare skin, and how each quill stroke corresponded to a transgression as common as gossip or as minor as leaving your livestock to wander. First, imagine a villager tossing apple cores into a neighbor's well. You likely picture a small fine or forced fetching of water, yet in the local code book, the penalty is 10 gentle strokes across the offender's palms and underarms with a goose feather duster. One mainstream historical fact: by the 14th century CE, communal wells were essential for survival, and contaminating one even with rotting fruit endangered every household. Historians still argue whether pigeon feather instead of goose would have sufficed. Some claim goose feathers with their sturdier quills left a sharper sting, ensuring the lesson stuck. You stifle a half-laugh, imagining someone shrugging while saying, "I only dropped one core," then flinching as the first feathery brush skims their palm. Next picture, the gossiping widow who spread word that the miller's ale was tainted with a rabbit's foot in the mash. In many villages, sowing rumors counted as defamation offering a thin line between free speech and felony. The village's modest code specified offenders must stand in the market square, arms outstretched, as two assistants used small bundles of dyed turkey feathers to tickle their ribs for 5 measured strokes each. One quirky tidbit: some sly medieval spouses would soak feathers in vinegar before a duster penalty to intensify the sting, believing the acidic scent would add aromatic humility. Whether vinegar-soaked tickles truly deterred gossip or merely added vinegar odor to the mix remains a topic of whispered debate. You shiver slightly picturing that sour tang on your ribs as you try not to squirm. By mid-morning, you'll see children playing feathered justice in the shadows of a haystack. Little ones reenacting adult punishments with bird-down plumes stolen from pillow stuffing. Laughter echoes as they mimic the local neck-pun pinch-no. Not the pinch feather-infused protocol. One boy squeals, "Stop, my reputation is at stake." You can't help grinning at how even playtime borrowed from the village's registry of petty wrongs, minor thefts, teasing goats, skipping chores. Those children understand early that transgression, no matter how small, like pinching a neighbor's turnip, invites a feathery reckoning. Pause at the butcher's stall, where a young apprentice hunches over chopped meat, sweating in a leather apron. Yesterday, he nicked a roast chicken, just one from a neighbor's coop. Today, the penalty is 8 strokes on each sole with a plucked goose-wing duster. One mainstream historical fact: poultry theft was rife in medieval markets, and a single chicken could feed a family for days. In response, villages often specified goose-wing dusters, believing their size and heft delivered a more memorable penance. Historians still argue whether this punishment reduced theft more than a small fine. After all, a pound of feathers is cheaper than a pound of chicken meat. You watch the apprentice's eyes narrow, knowing his bare feet will soon feel goose down, tickling against his shredded pride. Further along, a group of weavers gossip at the loom shed, discussing how the blacksmith's new hammer design blows louder than a thunderstorm. That's an insult to blacksmithy craftsmanship, another common offense. The prescribed penalty: 15 gentle strokes under the offender's knees with an ostrich feather duster, as ostrich plumes were considered softer and more agile. One fringe detail: some believed ostrich feathers mimicked the wind's whisper, so tickling under your knees recalled the humbling stealth of nature. You half chuckle, imagining someone at a forge, knees trembling from tickles that replicate a whirlwind, thinking, if only my hammer's ringing could be as gentle. A little beyond, on the mossy stones near the church's side door, stands a bright tapestry of sticky elderberries, remnants of a late-night prank. Someone smashed berries, streaking their juice across cloisters. That counts as desecration, or at least troubadour's mischief. The village prosecutor demands the offender present 2 silver pennies and face a run of 20 strokes across the neck and wrists with a parrot feather duster. Parrot feathers, imported luxuries, signaled deeper disgrace. One mainstream historical fact: exotic feathers were rare in rural villages, so their presence in punishment marked a scandal beyond petty mischief. Historians still argue whether villages ever imported real parrot plumes or used dyed local feathers as theatrical substitutes. You can't help musing on the hush that must descend when a parrot-plumed duster appears like a peal of church bells signaling apocalypse. Gaze upward the battlements of the granary, and you'll glimpse a hand-lettered list, offenses and fines feathered penalty schedule, scribbled beneath littering hay chaff waste 6 goose-down strokes to the armpits, under loud yelling, at dusk 5 ostrich feather sweeps to the ribs, under stealing shine from neighbors' shoes 8 peacock plume strokes under the chin. 1 quirky tidbit shining one's shoes with another's leftover grease was considered a dignity theft, meriting chin tickles meant to evoke silent giggles. You rub your chin, imagining that delicate brush as a brush with disgrace. Oh dear, I've lost my shine and gained a laugh. Shadows lengthen as you come upon a group of youths sifting grain in a granary yard. A brother-sister squabble over spilled barley prompts the bailiff's assistant to demand token penance, 1 tickle stroke to the soles for each handful scattered. You note that everyday chores had embedded norms failing to respect communal resources, like spilling barley invited gentle reminders via feathers. One mainstream historical fact: communal granaries were essential food stores, and misuse or wastage had to be curbed. Historians still debate whether tickling penalties for resource wastage effectively conserved food or merely amused the crowd. You watch as each youth removes their boots and feels goose core tickles that emphasize respect grain as if you respect bread itself. You pass into the courtyard behind the apothecary, where mothers gather to swap poultices and gripe about swarming mosquitoes. A commotion rises as a man accused of selling rancid lard steps onto the stand, brandishing his wide-brimmed hat. The penalty: 20 ostrich plume strokes on the inner thighs. The crowds hush. No one wants to hear that or picture tickling under one's thigh. You fight the instinct to recoil, remembering that the point is humiliation, not harm. One fringe belief holds that under-thigh tickling guided dark spirits from lodging in one's liver, an odd intersection of superstition and punishment. You studiously note the oddity, impressed by how ritual and folk medicine entwine. Near the granary's gate, a man sits bound with supple rope, awaiting his tickling for selling water mixed with pond scum. The bailiff's assistant steps forward with a set of tiny silken ostrich feathers, each dyed pale yellow. She strikes the man's wrists and ankles with the feathery tips lighter than a cat's paw. Yet once contact is made, his entire body convulses with involuntary laughter. The crowd's hush shivers into tremulous giggles as though they share in his shame. Excessive laughter here morphs into communal empathy. Yes, he shorted the water supply, but he's human fallible, and his laughter becomes a shared balm. You step back, exhaling a breath you didn't realize you held. As market day crescendos, you come upon the final typical infraction: a mother accused of overcharging neighbors for eggs, 1 egg for 2 coins instead of 1. The bailiff, wearing a linen sash inscribed with the words Justitia Pluma, presides. He offers the mother a simple choice: a fine of 3 pence or 10 dove feather strokes. She hesitates, counting her last coins, and opts for the feathers. Each stroke across her neck sends shivers down her spine, but each gasp of laughter also greases the cogs between guilt and grace. One mainstream historical fact: poultry prices, fluctuated with seasons and overcharging, could spark real conflict. Historians still argue whether undervalued fines or feathered pennants proved more equitable. Some claim pennants forged social bonds by letting the village unite in gentle reprimand, not flickering coinage. As the square empties and dust settles over scattered hay bales, you can almost taste the communal alchemy at work. Minor wrongs give rise to soft feathers. Embarrassment yields lessons. Laughter cements kinship. You realize how feather-duster justice kept villages turning. No heavy jails, no bloodshed, only waves of fluffed pennants washed down by communal understanding. Walking past the coachmaker's shop, you spot a child balancing a shining wood wheel on his shoulder, puffing his cheeks like a kiddie knight. You recall a final, especially trivial offense a child caught, sticking a sharpened stick into a neighbor's yoked horse. The prescribed penalty: 5 strokes of a blackbird feather duster across the soles done by a fellow child. Touching a blackbird's feather, rumored to echo the wing's quicksilver flick, supposedly imparted a sense of responsibility for animal life. One fringe tidbit villages swore by blackbird justice, believing that tickling with blackbird feathers prevented children from ever cruelty again, though no one tracks success rates. You glance at the child, he wobbles, his laughter trailing off into regret, as he's gently tickled by peers. As the day ripens toward afternoon, you emerge from the crowded side streets into a field of goldenrod where bees hum. The hum soothes the post-tickle vibration still tingling across your own soles. You think back on each layer of petty offenses observed: littering, gossip, theft, price gouging, livestock trespass, resource wastage, and how each tickle was calibrated to match the communal unease. In a world starved of coins and courts, feathered pennants served as a cheap portable judiciary, a tactile reminder that order often requires just a hint of discomfort. You feel a gentle breeze stir barley heads to nod in rhythm, and as you follow a dirt track toward the next hamlet, you linger on the academic debate echoing in your mind. Historians still argue whether these punishments were deterrents or simply a form of communal theater you recall from a leather-bound tome you once read in a dusty abbey. Maybe the answer lies somewhere between stern warning and soft absurdity laughter, serving as both salve and chastisement. The villages you've passed integrate penance with, play an intricate dance of community humility and flickering humor. You trudge on the path leading through knee-high grasses speckled with daisies, each petal resembling a tiny tribute to the morning's ritual. In this tapestry of barley and blossom, your steps echo an age-old principle that communal well-being often hinges on small corrections delivered with a feather's gentle caress. And though you've witnessed punishments that would leave most trembling, the prevailing sense is one of unity. If laughter can heal wounds, perhaps it can also stitch together fractured bonds. As you crest the final rise before the village's field edge, you hear the faint toll of the church bell calling midday prayer. Travelers pause or removing hats in deference. You sense the village's heartbeat, synchronized prayers, communal lunch, and perhaps another round of feather duster penance after the noonday meal. The cycle never truly pauses: the hum of trades, the feathery whip of penance, the weaving of fellowship. And you, an outsider, glimpsing this world, tuck each scene into your memory like a patch on a quilt, knowing that when you recall this moment, you'll feel the goose down's brush and the rise of laughter beneath the sun-warmed sky. You trudge up a narrow lane lined with low stone cottages, the morning sun warming the lichen-etched roof tiles. The hush of dawn lingers, broken only by clucking hens and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. In the heart of this quiet hamlet stands the home of the parish constable, a half-timbered structure with a small yard where a hawthorn tree casts mottled shade. You probably think constable brings to mind armored knights or gendarmes with swords, but in these parts, the constable's most potent tool is a simple feather duster. His role is both symbolic and practical. He's the gentle enforcer of communal norms, ensuring villages keep accords without drawing blood or hanging thieves from the nearest oak. Stepping into the yard, you see the constable seated on a wooden stool, his russet breeches and indigo doublet dusted with flour, evidence that he just helped bake early morning loaves for villagers in need. A large oak chest beside him holds an array of feather dusters, some goose down, others ostrich plumes, dyed a faint teal, and a few trimmed with delicate peacock feathers for grave offenses. He glances up, giving you a wry nod. You recall from last night's fireside that this modest man once apprehended a drunken miller by tickling him into confession. One mainstream historical fact: by the 15th century CE parish constables in many English counties were tasked with upholding petty ordinances, often with no more than village consensus and makeshift tools. Historians still argue whether such constables derived their authority from written law or popular mandate. But here, the constable commands respect not through sword or statute, but through the soft swish of feathers. As you approach, he gestures for a stool beside his own. You settle down, brushing a stray barley flake from your sleeve, and notice his gentle demeanor. He wears a lamb's wool scarf. To cushion the feathers he wields a reminder that even enforcers must temper power with compassion. He lifts a goose down duster and taps it lightly against his palm, an invitation. You remember today's docket. A trio of villagers stand accused of letting their donkeys bray at forbidden hours, disturbing the peace when everyone else slept. Sleep is precious. The constable murmurs, his voice a low rumble. When people jangle their lives at midnight, they risk ticklish correction at dawn. He plucks a note from his belt pouch, reading off the names: Alaric the potter, Mildred the washerwoman, and Thomas the miller. Justice, as he sees it, should be as light as a feather. No weighty chains, just a few strokes to recalibrate behavior. You follow him as he rises to find each offender seated on a stool beneath the hawthorn's spread limbs, their wrists bound loosely behind their backs with braided twine. Alaric wears a flour-dusted smock that smells faintly of lavender, an odor intended to soothe nerves. One quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Local lore holds that lavender-scented smoke wards off tickling spirits. So some accused villagers drape lavender sprigs over their shoulders before facing the duster, believing it softens the strokes. You smirk at the image of somebody tiptoeing into lavender cords to hedge against goose down tickles. But for Alaric, the scent is a small comfort. The constable produces a duster trimmed with goose, down its handle carved by local wood carvers to depict stylized hammers and anvil motifs, honoring tradespeople's vital roles. He instructs Alaric to remove his boots, revealing sturdy leather soles hardened by kiln heat and clay dust. Then the constable's assistant, an elderly tailor with nimble fingers, steps forward, offering a linen cloth to wrap around the potter's ankles, a precaution against over-tickling. The cloth, thin as spider silk, serves as a buffer, ensuring the tickling sensation remains within reason. You lean close and catch the flick of Alaric's eyes, equal measures of apprehension and begrudging acceptance. With a swift nod, the constable begins. The feather soft tips brush along Alaric's arches. At first, it's a gentle caress, soft as a dove's sigh. Alaric's shoulders jerk instinctively, but he forces himself to remain still, lips pressed into a line as if tasting clay. A high-pitched snort escapes before he can stifle it. Eyes squeezed shut, he shakes imperceptibly, each inhalation ragged. The constable continues, counting each stroke in a murmured cadence. 1, 2, 3. 5 strokes elicit a suppressed giggle. By the 8th, Alaric's flinches escalate to full-blown laughter that resonates through the yard, mingling with bird song overhead. The crowd that's gathered, a mix of bakers, blacksmiths, and shepherds, watches in empathetic silence. They know too well that a missed burner in Alaric's workshop could spell ruin, and that braying donkeys kept them sleepless and irritable. Here the laughter punctures tension. The community breathes together, each exhale a release. You sense Alaric's shoulders loosen with the laughter. The constable's final stroke prompts a high-pitched chuckle so infectious that a ring of sheep in the nearby pen bleats in awkward imitation. The constable halts, patting the duster gently against his palm as he pronounces, "Let this remind you that respect for rest is respect for all." He allows Alaric to slip on his boots, each movement measured, dignified, even though his feet still tingle with residual goose-down memories. Next, the tailor binds the ankles of Mildred the washerwoman. Her feet, chapped and pruned from hours at the river, make fine canvas for the goose-down dance. Her eyes glisten with unshed tears, perhaps from shame, perhaps from the raw sensation. The constable's assistant wipes a tear from her cheek, slipping a sprig of thyme behind Mildred's ear, an unscripted kindness, believed to soothe tickle frayed nerves. You recall that folklore thyme-scented feathers were reputed to cleanse the spirit-keeping pests of ill will at bay. Whether thyme truly warded off ire or merely added a pleasant aroma, it shows that even in punishment, communities wove threads of care. The duster's first whispery touch beneath Mildred's arch sends her into convulsions of polite outrage. She clutches the sides of her skirt, yelling mercy between gasps of laughter. The constable's measured strokes continue, each touch like a promise to reorient her path from hogwash to household harmony. "Stop letting those braying beasts roam, girl," the constable says in a stage whisper. "It's one thing when your husband's donkey brays another when we all want sleep." The crowd emits soft chuckles and nods approving this measured lesson. After 10 strokes, Mildred's laughter slows into hushed giggles. The assistant offers her water from a copper cup, another ritual of mercy. Finally, Thomas the miller kneels before the oak chest. His hands, calloused from centuries of turning millstone, shake slightly as he removes his boots. You watch the constable choose a duster trimmed in ostrich plumes, lighter yet longer, meant for a more sensitive region under the arms. Tomas's deathly pale armpits, usually hidden beneath temperate layers, belie his fear. The kitchen behind the yard, where herds of hens scratch and peck at spilled grain, falls silent as the first feather trace skims Tomas's underarm. It's a delicate caress, softer than satin, and Thomas yelps. A high-flung laugh trails from his mouth as his torso convulses involuntarily in quivering fits. 10 ostrich-thin strokes later, he leans back, panting with relief and humility, while the constable murmurs, "Do not mix peasant's wheat with pond water, good man." The crowd titters in empathetic affirmation, a communal conviction that honesty kept mills turning. As Thomas stands now fully clothed, a breeze shifts, sending a swirl of fallen hawthorn petals across the yard. You realize that every bead of sweat glistening on the constable's brow, every quivering foot, every flush of cheeks, is woven into the loom of village life, tiny fibers of corrections that together create a tapestry of mutual respect. One fringe belief surfaces. Some villagers whispered that if a constable's feathers remained intact after 3 seasons of use, the constable's lineage would be blessed with calm communities. Whether that superstition held water or just kept the constable's feathers in top condition, it underscores the reverence villagers held for the role. The constable steps down from his stool and announces, "We close courts until tomorrow's dawn, when new petitions rise with the sun." His voice blends with the bleat of sheep and the ring of a mason's hammer. In the distance, offenders now pardoned through laughter drip away, each escorted by a neighbor, to share a piece of bread and comfort. The constable gathers his dusters, inspecting each for broken quills or stains. Worn feathers are replaced, frayed handles sealed with resin, ritualized maintenance that ensures readiness for tomorrow's misdeeds. You rise to leave, tucking the memory of those feathered strokes into your own heart. As you trudge past the hawthorn tree, you pause to inspect an elderberry bush, where blossoms cling to still green leaves promising berries to come. Elderberry was often brewed into tonic thought to soothe ticklish aches, a local remedy for whip-induced bruises or tickle-induced fevers. This perfect convergence of elderberry and feather duster lore reminds you that punishment and healing share an undercurrent, a communal responsibility to rebalance the body and spirit. Moving toward the village's edge, you catch a glimpse of the constable stowing dusters in a corner of his hearth-warmed cottage. By the firelight, he carves a small wooden charm in the shape of a goose's head, magic, some say, to guide lost travelers. You tip your hat to him, murmuring, "Your justice is as gentle as your mercy." He offers a short nod, already focused on tonight's docket of dissent, rumors of stolen hay squabbles over firewood, and perhaps one more donkey crossing the line. You sense his shoulders rise at the thought, but they quickly settle, steadied by the knowledge that soft feathers can correct even the gruffest behavior. As you wander into the next field, where barley rises in neat columns and willow trees sway by the brook, you ponder how the parish constable's role, wielding feather dusters instead of iron clubs, shapes the village's very heartbeat. Each gentle stroke fosters connection, no blood, no broken bones, only a chorus of laughter binding everyone to shared values. You recall again that scholarly debate phrase, historians still argue whether the soft justice of feather dusters reinforced or undermined authority. Yet here, on this sun-dappled lane, You feel confident that laughter's restorative power often surpasses tongues of flame hammers strike or iron fetters. As you follow the brook's gentle rush, the distant cluck of hens and rustle of barley offer a lullaby, reminding you that justice served gently can resonate far longer than any echo of violence. You navigate a narrow footbridge of weathered oak planks spanning a low-lying marsh, the reeds whispering ancient secrets beneath the morning sun's gentle caress. The silt beneath shifts softly with your weight, conjuring memories of that ill-fated caravan crossing when the sand nearly swallowed your sandals whole. Remember that. Now you sense a similar hazard. Missteps in this marsh walk may invite misfortune of a different sort, one measured not in quicksand, but in social missteps. Ahead lies the Lowbrook farmstead, where two unfortunate souls await their punishment under a plum tree that bellies purple blossoms at this time of year. This punishment, too, involves feather dusters, but today's infraction is grounded in a clash of social stations. A fisher's lad accused of filching eggs meant for the local widows and the ladies' chamberlain. Once a man of solidity, recently discovered pocketing silk scraps to line his breeches. The two offenses, though different in scale, both warranted feathered penance, revealing how feather justice spanned class boundaries. The marsh mists cling to your boots as you proceed, the earthy perfume tinged with damp alder and marshmallow blooms, a fragrance both calming and foreboding. You approach the farmstead's iron gate, where daisies push through mossy stones, their petals trembling in the breeze. Inside, a circle of villagers has formed beneath the plum tree's canopy, their faces etched with a mix of pity and stern expectation. The fisher's lad, lean and sinewy from river work, shivers despite the fluff of a woolen tunic. His hands tremble as though they still taste brine. The lady's chamberlain, decked in a russet doublet that seemed finer days, stands a step away, his boots polished, but his eyes cast downward. Between them sits a long wooden bench, and atop it two feather dusters, one plucked from a seafaring goose, white and sturdy, and the other trimmed with teal-tipped peacock plumes for richer, more shameful offenses. Nearby, the farm's elder matron, a woman of salt and vinegar speech, shakes a burlap sack of dried lavender, unconvinced that scent alone can sweeten wrongs done in shadow. One mainstream historical fact by the 15th century CE community-led punishments often employed materials at hand: white goose feathers for commoners, rare peacock feathers for wealthier offenders, demonstrating social hierarchies in the instruments of discipline. Historians still argue whether feather justice reinforced class division or offered a low-cost deterrent across the spectrum. As you settle onto a sun-warmed stone, you sense today's proceedings will test that very balance. The constable's assistant steps forward, gloved in thin leather, to protect against unexpected bites. River critters sometimes lurk here, having a nibble on bare skin. She addresses the fisher's lad first, her voice a soft chime. "Young Thomas, you admit to taking eggs from the village store, eggs meant for the widows who cannot fish the brook. Explain before we proceed." Thomas's jaw tightens. Guilt shadows his eyes. He speaks in a voice raspy from early morning wind. I thought no one noticed. The hens wandered near my nets, so I took one or two to feed my ma and little sister. The crowd hums in understanding harsh times drive unlikely deeds. His confession punctuates the marsh's hush. The assistant nods solemnly. You broke trust, boy, and your penalty shall. We'll use the goose-down duster. The matron interrupts her tone, half laughter, half lecture. 1 stroke per egg. You stole 4 strokes for 4 eggs. On bare soles, mind you, so you'll remember to put eggs back where they belong. A ripple of agreement passes through onlookers. The penalty balances sustenance need and communal order. You recall Alaric's goose-down penance and Mildred's lavender-soaked tickles. Now Thomas's turns follows that lineage. Tomas's eyes widen at bare soles. He steps off the bench, tugging his woolen hose down, exposing rough, salted feet. The assistant plucks the goose-down duster, its long quills plucked fresh from last season's yield, and dabs it in a basin of cool water infused with mint to prevent feather fraying. She positions Tomas's left foot on a carved oak block footmark A, as if each mark recorded bygone offenses and ticks gently across his sole. Tomas's toes curl. A stifled whimper escapes. The first stroke whispers like a moan beneath the goose's wing, and the forest of grass seems to sigh. He bites his lip. The second stroke follows. 10 fingers curl around the plank as if gripping a marching pole. By the third stroke, pure giggles tumble from Thomas, echoing like frog calls in the reeds. The fourth and final stroke, toward his left sole, triggers a small yelp and a rush of red across his cheeks. The assistant moves him to his right sole. 4 more strokes there, and Tomas's laughter roars, rolling, bubbling laughter tinged with shame, melting firmly into a lesson about property and empathy. Once done, the assistant spreads rosemary on the oak block and herb believed to soothe tickle-induced aches. Tomas stands clutching spindly wrists and retrieves his hose and stocking his feet, tender but alive with the lesson. The matron hands him a rough linen cloth, knotted with lavender, to ease your steps and remind you of mercy. She intones. He nods, wiping tears from laughter and shame alike, absorbing the village's compassion and caution. Now all eyes shift to the chamberlain, a man of station, now humbled. Contrast ripples through the crowd. Some frown, seeing a nobleman reduced to tickles, while others smile at the poetic justice he who scorned loaves and beads in his treasury now braces for dye-soaked peacock plumes. The constable's assistant removes his breeches, revealing smooth, pampered feet untouched by river silt or pebbles. A hush descends as her hand tightens on the peacock duster's handle, the plumes shimmering in teal and emerald highlights. One quirky detail, peacock feathers believed by some to ward off the evil eye, can also heighten the sting, so using them on the overstepping gentry reflects a belief that proper punishment must carry spiritual and physical weight. You wonder whether Chamberlain Percival regrets ever lining his pockets, now that every strand of aristocratic entitlement sits atop his malleable flesh. The assistant positions Percival's left foot upon footmark B, an oak block marked with the village crest. Her plumes hover, and she begins feathers brushing beneath his ankle, tickling the soft skin there. Percival gasps, a wheezing shriek of surprise. The crowd gasps in chorus. The first stroke is swift, the plumes dancing. Percival's knees jolt. He grips an imagined tether as if expecting the world behind him to vanish. On the second stroke, His shoulders bounce a suppressed chuckle, but he clamps his jaw. The assistant continues 10 deliberate strokes across his left ankle, then 12 across his right sole. Each movement sends ripples of laughter, not hearty chuckles, but strained giggles. Faces contorted between embarrassment and reflex. The village lords look on, jaws clenched. None intervene, understanding this punishment maintains social equilibrium. A stray child only inches away covers his mouth to muffle laughs, eyes twinkling as he watches the chamberlain's dignity dissolved in ticklish public spectacle. Meanwhile, Percival's cheeks burn scarlet. He resembles a roasted pheasant, plucked of pride. By the 20th stroke, he gasps, dropping to his knees, meeting the assistant's gaze, eyes brimming with regret and wonder. "I will not again," he breathes. Tears glisten as he stands lifting hose and breeches in shaky hands. The matron steps forward with a silver goblet of cool milk sweetened with honey. "A salve for your spirit," she coos. Percival's fingers tremble as he lifts the goblet, hesitating before drinking. The honey trickles down his chin, a humble touch to one so used to silk and perfumed cologne. As Percival takes his leave, the plum blossoms fall in a silent witnessing petals, drifting like pale confessions. The constable's assistant gathers the peacock feather duster, swirling the plumes gently to release stray pollen as villagers murmur among themselves. "Even nobility must heed our codes," one elder says quietly to his neighbor, who nods, adding, "A lesson in humility indeed." You note how the punishment's design equalizes social standing. Whether a lad from the river or a lord's right hand, both felt the same flutters of shame and laughter. While Percival retreats to redress you, wander toward the enclosures at the edge of the marsh, where knowledge of life's unpredictability echoes in every reed. A brood of geese waddles by, a living reminder of yesterday's feather-plucking today's dusters. Nearby, a shepherd tends a small flock of sheep shading beneath a hawthorn. You recall how sheep shearers once bartered their services for the right to pluck goose feathers once a year, an exchange that ensured both wool and feather remained integral to village life. One fringe belief still whispered here: villagers thought goose breath carried by the plumes could sniff out light-fingered intentions in human hearts. It's a notion that, while unprovable, strengthened communal trust. When a feather passed your lips, you confessed your deeds, even when faced with penance. You leave the geese to their grazing, strolling back to the main lane. The air here tastes sweet, tinged with marsh tang and distant hearth smoke, an olfactory tapestry stitching past and present. As you pass a small shrine dedicated to St. Barnabas, protector of poultry, you pause to glance at its simple carving, a goose standing by a blossom-laden branch. Pilgrims once left feathers there, thanking the saint for mercy or requesting absolution. One mainstream historical fact: rural shrines often doubled as focal points for communal vows and atonements, with tokens, beads, or feathers left as tangible markers of confession. Historians still argue whether these shrines influenced secular punishments or simply ran parallel. But here, the boundary blurs. Spiritual contrition and fizzy laughter addictions merge in the same breath. You trudge on each footstep, carrying you away from that plum-scented court of laughter, yet a part of you bows to its lessons that humility, drama, and mirth can live in a single ritual. As you scale the gentle slope toward a knoll overlooking the marsh, the constable's words echo. Feathers are light, but they weigh heavily on hearts unheeding. You reflect that a mere tickle can bring more insight than a harsh blow and idea, as counterintuitive as whispering truth instead of shouting orders. On the hill's crest, you glimpse the next village's rooftops, a patchwork of gray thatch and red clay. Its spire shines in morning light like a beacon, calling the next procession of pranked souls. But for now, you pause opening your satchel to untie the small lavender-scented pouch given to the fisher's lad, an amulet to remind him never to lift another egg. You tie the pouch to your belt loop as a quiet tribute to Mercy's sweeter face. The lavender's fragrance drifts, layering over marsh scents, a sensory bookmark in this living narrative. As you descend toward the sunward rooftops, you sense the morning's hush, giving way to the hum of village life. You're not just a traveler, but a chronicler of these feather-tinged rituals, moments where laughter and chastisement entwine beneath plum blossoms and hawthorn. And with each step, you carry the lesson that gentle penance administered with a feather's soft touch forges community bonds stronger than any iron chain could. In a world clattering with metal and brimstone, here the dance of a duster's plume reigns supreme. The next chapter's promise gleams more villages await each with their own avian justice traditions, ready to teach new shades of shared humanity beneath a sky and feather. You wander down the dusty lane toward the river, crossing the afternoon light rippling through the fields of barley to your left, the air scented with fresh hay and distant river moss. The rhythmic clang of a weaver's loom drifts from an open cottage window. Inside, a wizened woman uses a goose feather brush to knock loose tangled fibers and echo the day's earlier penances. You recall how in every hamlet the constant dance of feather and flesh wove moral tapestries within villagers' lives. Today, you're heading to Ravensweir's Bridge, where the infraction is distinct, failing to ring the village's noonday curfew bell, letting hours slip unpaid to communal prayer. The punishment askew from petty theft or gossip is a swift run of ostrich plume strokes along the offender's lower back. It's a ritual combining ecclesiastical devotion with a ticklish reminder of punctuality. As you approach, you see the constable's lantern hanging by the bridge's wooden arch, an emblem that justice flows here as surely as the river beneath. The offender, Angus Half-Tide McGowan, stands barefoot on the bridge's mossy planks, clenching his fists. He's a stocky fisherman with salt and pepper stubble, his tunic damp from early clouds. Last night, he dawdled at the quay, swapping fishhook stories until the bell's last toll faded into silence. Now, sun bleaching through gray clouds, a half-dozen villagers gather, clotting the bridge railing like barnacles. One mainstream historical fact by the 13th century CE church bells regulated communal life, calling farmers to fields, signaling curfews, and marking canonical hours. Historians still argue whether missing one bell toll was minor impudence or a sign of deeper disrespect. But here, it's enough to merit feathered penance. You step onto the bridge, the planks creaking beneath you, and breathe in the earthy river scent, damp alder leaves, and catkin dust. Angus's face, lit by slanted sunbeams, reflects a mix of contrition and defiance. Heard that toll, loud as thunder. He rumbles his voice, rough as gravel, but thought I had time for another cup of mead. The constable's assistant, a tall man in a faded teal jerkin, crosses his arms glancing at the ostrich-plumed duster resting in his leather belt pouch. The duster's plumes, long and supple, fan outward like a dancer's skirt, hinting at both softness and discipline. One fringed tidbit surfaces some believed ostrich feathers because they came from flightless birds symbolized humility. If used for penance, they grounded arrogance. Whether that symbolism altered tickle intensity or simply gave people an extra reason to cringe it, underscored the ritual's gravity. The constable, a lean fellow with a snowy beard, steps forward holding a small parchment scroll that records Angus's missives and debts, both civic and spiritual. He recites Angus McGowan. You've missed the midday Angelus for the third time this fortnight. Church demands punctuality. Your penance 20 strokes of the ostrich plume upon your lower back. A hush settles, broken only by the river's soft gurgle. The constable's voice is calm but unwavering, reminding you of the hush after the last shepherd's tickling penance. Angus glances at the constable, his shoulders sagging as if weighed by the river itself, then bows an unspoken agreement. He unlaces his leather vest, folding it neatly over a bench, revealing a coarsely woven linen shirt. The sun's warmth bleaches the shirt to off-white, but you can sense the sweat still damp at his nape. With a decisive nod, the constable's assistant plucks the ostrich feather duster from his belt. He begins at Angus's left hip, brushing the plume upward against the hip bone. The ostrich's tip strokes with a feather-like caress. Yet Angus's muscles cringe. You notice the twitch beneath his shirt at that first whisper of feather. It's as if the plume channel's church-disciplined gentle altar breeze at dawn turned suddenly into the levity of involuntary laughter. Angus's shoulders roll forward. He's silent at first, each inch of plume awakening nerves he forgot existed. The assistant's strokes continue 1 through 10, tickling the threshold where flesh meets sinew. By the 11th stroke, Angus's shoulders tremble, but he fights a cry of laughter, his knuckles whitening on the wooden rail. The crowd leans in, farmers, weavers, and elder matron alike, watching the constable's assistant's steady arm. The 12th stroke skims across Angus's spinal ridge, and he jolts forward, laughter bubbling from deep within. The ostrich's lightness becomes a playful reprimand, drawing laughter and empathy in equal measure. One villager whispers, "May he carry back to church a heart lighter than his nets." Indeed, the tickles transform admonishment into shared humor, something beyond mere correction. Triumphant at the 16th stroke, the assistant's wrist is precise, delivering each flick like a bar of music, soft, rhythmic, assertive. Angus digs his toes into the plank, forcing stillness as laughter threatens to overwhelm breath. The constable watches, eyes steely, ensuring justice balanced with mercy. Finally, on the 20th and final stroke, the duster twirls, sending a flurry of ostrich down across Angus's back. He shakes a final shudder of laughter and then exhales, bending forward. The assistant steps back and extends a cup of cool water, an antidote to laughter's sudden flush. Angus's lips curve into a sheepish grin as he gulps, wiping water from his chin with the back of his hand. The crowd releases a collective breath. The constable addresses Angus May. These feathers remind you of the church's watchful eye. Mend your ways, lest the river's current sweep you from our prayers. Angus nods, replacing his vest and straightening his tunic. He bows to the constable, then to the crowd, and steps off the bench feet, lighter, step steadier, heading back across the bridge toward the quay. As you follow him, you sense the reversal. Missed bells like echoes in the heart can be corrected with compassionate tickles, knitting parishioners back into the community's prayerful fold. Beyond Angus, you come upon the lady's chamberlain's heir Elsbeth, a teenager caught cutting cheese rations early to sneak a slice each dawn. This offense, mild yet cheeky, merits a penalty of 5 dove feather strokes to her palms. Dove feathers soft and downy symbolize gentleness fitting for a youthful prank. You see her standing barefoot on a wooden stool, cheeks flushed midday pink, clutching the hem of her sage-green tunic. The constable's assistant holds the dove feather duster, each plume a symbol of peace, now bent to admonition. One mainstream historical fact: villagers viewed early riser food skimming, be it cheese porridge or milk, as a subtle theft reflecting individual needs, but undermining communal sharing. Historians still argue whether such minor penalties truly reinforced solidarity or fostered sly subversions. But in this village, Elspeth's penance will likely serve as cautionary tale to every dawn rover. Elspeth's knees quiver as the first dove feather stroke sweeps across her left palm. The sensation is like a whispery breeze on bare skin, prompting a tiny pout. The second stroke across her right palm brings a squeak. Her slender fingers curl reflexively. By the fifth, she's giddy, barely suppressing laughter. The matron's gentle gaze encourages her to stand firm, lest she waste village's patience. Elspeth's final breath leaks as she forces her palm's flat chin rising with budding pride. She's endured, learned, and now reintegrates with a chuckle at her own impetuosity. The constable claps his hands. Let's share cheese at tomorrow's dawn. Everyone no early hands. You step away from the plum-scented air of penance to wander toward the wheat threshing ground where villagers separate grain from chaff in rhythmic flails. A group of youths waits nearby, for later they'll reenact the morning's lessons, each drawing a feather duster from a communal bucket and taking turns delivering mock penances to a straw doll. These rituals aren't mere entertainment, but practice, so that if real need arises, the young learn to balance firmness with care. One fringe tidbit circulates among them: cowhides soaked in vinegar, used as protective mats for tickled feet, an old wife's tale to soften the sting. You chuckle at the idea of vinegar-softened mats, but in the sunshine, it seems plausible that innocence softened by laughter can work wonders too. From the threshing ground, you wander down to the oxen pasture, where beasts chew cud beneath a hazy mid-morning sky. A constable's assistant tends to a pair of oxen harnessed to a grinding stone, his broad shoulders, strong hands calloused for morning's work. He notices your gaze and lifts a small ostrich plume from a leather sheath. Laughter flickers in his eyes. He explains, "We use these plumes to coax cattle during branding tender strokes to calm their flanks before the iron sear." You nod, absorbing how feather strokes, once tools of social censure, also serve practical gentling in animal husbandry. It's a lovely symmetry. Soft quills tame both human pride and animal ferocity, woven seamlessly into daily life. You meander onward, crossing a stone causeway where water wheels turn lazily, dampness clinging to mossy edges. The constable's duck feather duster, a smaller, quirkier tool, sits propped against the millstone's parapet, awaiting tonight's punishment for a weaver accused of splicing dyed thread, improperly staining a bolt of cloth. Duck feathers mottled and supple symbolize the small yet meaningful errors that can gum up communal life. That weaver's penance of 5 strokes beneath her elbows will swirl dye and laughter alike, reminding her that precision matters in both thread and trust. As you trace the river's meander toward the tavern at Ravensweir's edge, you feel the weight of today's tapestry mist, bells, filched cheese, and river-borne missteps, all suspended on the wings of ostrich dove and goose feathers. The constable's role, wielding soft plumes in measured strokes, feels akin to a caretaker's hand steering villagers back into rhythm, coaxing them toward communal harmony with laughter's gentle chords. Even the lone miller's assistant, who forgot last week's market dues, took a peacock plume penance this morning, his silk waistband a quiet testament that no cloth is too fine to evade moral currency. You approach the tavern's oaken doors where the smell of malt and rose-hip ale mingles in a fragrant symphony. Inside, a group of villagers resumes their midday repast plates of stewed goose-crusty bread and ale, reflecting sunlight from leaded windows. Laughter bubbles as they recite the morning's penances, punctuating the retelling with feathery gestures. One burly farmer mimics the ostrich plume sweep with his hand, sending a ripple of abusement through the table. You slide onto a bench beside the inn's hearth, grateful for the warmth and the rippled echo of good company. You think back to last night's fireside debate. Historians still argue whether feather penances were a form of social control or simply compassionate restitution someone had posited. Here in the hum of midday chatter, you see both sides, feather strokes, controlled impulses, but also taught empathy. Each giggle, quelling rage, each blush, restoring trust. As you lift a pewter mug of ale to your lips, its cool taste catching on your tongue, you smile at Ravensweir's tapestry, woven of plum blossoms, river cries, and the soft drum of feathers on skin. Outside, the river glints beneath a shroud of early cloud, as if echoing the Punisher's swift, silent shimmering with possibility. Today's tickles have realigned hearts beside that plum tree, reminding every soul that communal bonds once frayed can be mended with laughter's gentle strokes. As you ready yourself to press on to the next village, where undoubtedly another feather ritual awaits you, carry in your memory's pocket the suited contrasts. A fisherman's groan beneath ostrich plumes, a teenager's squeal under dove down, and the chamberlain's muted hum beneath peacock's pride. Each moment etched in laughter and humility, guides you onward the soft quills, leading you along rivers and roads alike. Finally, as you leave the tavern's warmth and step into the open, sunset-lit fields, you reflect on how feather justice lives on in every scratched soul, every red palm, and every ripple of shared amusement. The constable's workshop, the weaver's loom, the miller's wheel, each nook of village life hums with the echoes of yesterday's penances. The next hamlet calls its rooftops glinting like silent witnesses, and you trudge forward, ready to chronicle its brand of feathered morality. Perhaps they'll penish midnight carolers or stray sheep rustlers with duck plumes or swan quills. Wherever you wander, one thing remains constant: a feather's gentle caress can shape destinies as deftly as any iron chain guiding villagers gently back into the fold with each laugh-laced stroke. You shuffle into the tavern's common room just as mid-afternoon's golden light wanes to a honeyed glow, the air thick with the heady aroma of spiced ale and roasting mutton. Wooden tables scarred by decades of tankard rings fill the space, and villagers crowd around benches, retelling old legends with volume that threatens the rafters. Here, at the hearth's edge, the tavern keeper, Master Giles, stands vigilant. His business hinges on mirth tempered by order. A brawl tonight could send him mopping blood rather than serving mugs. You know that in Ravensware and neighboring hamlets, the primary remedy for barroom brawls isn't a cudgel blow or bolt from the constable. It's a swift session of feather duster penance pinned squarely to the offender's rump. One mainstream historical fact: by the 14th century CE tavern keepers were legally empowered to administer minor corporal punishments for drunken mischief, sparing secular courts the bother of every ale-fueled affray. Historians still argue whether these punishments were an official extension of statutory law or merely tolerated customary practice, but here they stand as tradition whiter than foam on a foaming cup. Across the room, two portly laborers jostle over an empty ale cask. Joe the miller and Rowan the shepherd, each claiming the other overturned his mug of ale last night, splashing milled barley onto his breeches. Their scuffed boots thump against the floorboards as they argue in hushed roars of righteous indignation. Master Giles throws them a glare that could curdle fresh cream. One quirky tidbit drifts in. Locals claim that the feathers used for barroom justice come from geese fed on fallen brewery grains, their plumage imbued with a faint malted fragrance enough to remind offenders of their misdeed long after the tickling has ceased. You snicker, imagining a goose waddling through spent hops, growing stout and belligerent, only to have its plumes later elicit shrieks of laughter from rowdy brawlers. The tavern's jukebox, well, a battered hurdy-gurdy propped in the corner, plays a droning melody, and villagers clap in time, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension brewing at the bar. Master Giles hefts a fine-tailored goose-feather duster trimmed with a single blackbird plume reserved for the worst offenders. He unleashes a rasping bark miller and shepherd enough step up here. The room's cacophony hushes into a soupçon of anticipation. Joe, his cheeks flushed with ale and embarrassment, lurches forward. Rowan follows, shoulders hunched, as if expecting a thunderbolt. The tavern's windows frame the dusk sky, and beneath each pane faces peer in Woodwright's bakers, even the village parson's wife, all standing witness to this imminent affair. Master Giles addresses Joe first, his tone laced with gentle sarcasm. "Miller Thomas, is it true you overturned my ale last night?" As I pace behind the bar, Thomas's woolen tunic wavers as he nods sheepishly, a bristling counterpoint to his usual swagger. "Aye, Giles, but I thought you'd welcome a taste test. Didn't realize it'd cost me my dignity." The crowd leans closer, eager to see if the miller's wits can buy him amnesty. The constable's assistant, leaning against the hearth, mutters to his neighbor, he'll get 6 strokes, one for each spilled pint. Indeed, the tavern rules written in sear chalk on a blackboard near the hearth stipulate 6 barbed goose down strokes for a spilled mug of ale, each drop equating to a feathery peck. Miller Thomas rolls up his well-oiled breeches to reveal legs still sticky from yesterday's malt mash. He braces himself over a stout wooden barrel used for barrel polishing, presenting his round rump for penance. Master Giles dips the duster into a jug of lavender-scented vinegar, nodding at the assistant to begin. The first stroke along Thomas's left flank elicits a stifled harumph, an involuntary convulsion that shakes beneath the miller's every sinew. By the second and third strokes his eyes widen, pupils pinned back knuckles clutching the barrel's rim as Goose down teases the finest hairs on his skin. A muffled snort escapes him at the fourth stroke, laughter bubbling from deep within a man unaccustomed to public humility. The fifth and sixth pass in swift succession. Each elicits a burst of laughter that reverberates up the rafters. The crowd cheers politely, more relief than delight. They know that a brawl chilled by tickling thoruses breeds more harmony than bar stool brawling ever could. With Thomas stepping aside, Rowan the shepherd awaits judgment. He stands bare-legged on a plank laid across two wooden barrels, an improvised draft board declaring shepherd's platform. His woolen hose pools around his ankles. Giles consults the tavern ledger to confirm Rowan's tab 3 pints, consumed 2 spilled, and 1 verse of lewd song launched against the ends made. That lewd verse reportedly crossed the line between bawdy humor and insult to virtue hemmed by a single partridge plume's punishment. Master Giles's assistant retrieves a luxury of a partridge-feathered duster, more delicate, more deadly. Rumor has it, partridge plumes, though smaller, inflict a sharper tickle, as their barbs are firmer. One fringe tidbit, some say that a single partridge feather pressed against the skin can coax penitence from the most jaded hearts, akin to a hypnotic caress. The first stroke lands beneath Rowan's right rib, his sides convulsing with a gasp that ricochets off stone walls. His sheep-gray shirt hitches the glimpsed flesh paling in the tavern's shifting light. By the second stroke, his grin warps into a grimace. The third summons a burst of raucous laughter, startling a nursing goat tethered by the doorway. The crowd titters. You spot the miller wiping tears of hilarity from his eyes. Rowan's laughter grows contagious. The smith's apprentice at the far end freezes mid-sip, erupting in sudden guffaws that spread like wildfire. The fourth and fifth strokes come faster each ticklish breeze, sending the shepherd's shoulders jigging with reluctant merriment. At the sixth and final stroke, Rowan's laughter lifts his chin eyes, shining with both relief and chagrin, his punishment complete. Master Giles steps back, duster tucked away, eyes luminous with satisfaction that communal order was restored without blood or bruises. With the brawlers chastened, the tavern's hum reawakens the hurdy-gurdy drone, picks up a jaunty tune glasses, clink to resume merriment, and the hearth's fire crackles as if laughing itself. You linger near the hearth, watching villagers regain their mirthful stride. A handful of women gather to comfort Thomas and Rowan, offering tankards of honeyed cider to soothe quivering ribs. You note how quick the tide turns. Moments ago the offenders stood vulnerable under feathered scrutiny, and now they're embraced by supportive nods and sympathetic pats on the back. From the hearth's glow, the constable's assistant steps forward, unrolling a scrap of parchment pinned to the tavern's oak beam. No brawling from bells last tolled to curfew violation. Bring 6 goose strokes or 3 partridge strokes. The rules hover near the hearth's warmth, a reminder that even here where spirits flow freely, boundaries hold firm. One mainstream historical fact emerges. Chroniclers of medieval inns noted that many keepers enforced house rules through village council endorsement, rather than royal decree fusing secular and communal governance. Historians still debate whether such enforcement truly deterred mischief or merely shifted infractions beyond the inn's walls. In any case, tonight's feather duster spectacle underscores both the whimsy and weight of local custom. You sip a leftover nubbin of ale from a chipped pewter mug, tasting bitter barley and a hint of honeyed malt. As you do, you overhear talk at a nearby table where three journeyman carpenters plan their next building project, a new fence for the wheat field 6 poles high to prevent livestock from wandering. Their conversation drifts to how the constable used goose feathers to tickle a carpenter last month for neglecting the timber's broad goose down strokes along calloused palms that taught him precision in joinery. The incident transformed sloppy framing into a story passed by apprentices, a cautionary tale embroidered into each dovetail joint. You stand to leave weaving past tables where villagers resume games of dice, some playing for pennies, others wagering laughter as currency. A pair of children, giggling surreptitiously, bump a feather duster duel of their own just outside the open door, practicing on a scarecrow made of straw and old breeches. Their laughter melds with the tavern's warmth, a living testament that feather penance extends beyond solemn lessons. It's part of culture and kinship itself. Stepping out onto the dusky street, the tavern's doorway frames the final glow of dusk, fiery streaks fanning across the sky like a plume unfurled. The constable's assistant emerges, his silhouette outlined against the dying embers of firelight. He nods at you, then smirks as he tucks the partridge and goose feather dusters into his belt pouch, tonight's tools for tomorrow's lessons. You sense a quiet pride in their craftsmanship. Each duster shows signs of wear, goose down, smoothed by countless strokes, partridge speckles, faded by time, their handles polished by hands, both firm and forgiving. As you wander away, the scent of spiced ale clings to your senses, mingling with the river's brine and the soft musk of moist earth. You realize that in Ravensweir's collective heart, feather justice has woven itself into the grain of daily life, bringing laughter where admonishment might sting too sharply, forging bonds through shared vulnerability, and reminding everyone that redemption can spark from a tickle as gently as from a prayer. Behind you, the tavern's windows glow like amber lanterns of camaraderie, each pane a portal into a world where even the roughest ruffians learn humility through laughter. You walk onward, boots echoing on cobblestone, the tavern's hush rippling into the evening song of crickets and river sighs. Ahead, the next hamlet waits, perhaps with its own method of feathered civility, ready for new tales of goose down justice. And you compass in heart, rather than hand trudge confidently into the shadows, carrying the tavern's lessons, that even in places where tempers fray and ale flows free, gentle penance meted out with a feather's grace can mend the tapestry of village life more deftly than any iron fist. You trudge down a narrow lantern-lit alley toward the old watchtower, its stone walls glinting in the moon's silver light. The chilly night air tastes faintly of sheep's wool and pine smoke, an olfactory echo of your ankle-deep trek through sheepfolds just hours ago. As you approach the tower's stout wooden door, you recall locals whispering about a soldier who failed his guard duty here 3 nights past, lounging in the privy rather than scanning the horizon for raiders. In a village where safety means life, such lapses demand a peculiar kind of justice. Instead of branding irons or stocks, the constable's assistant now wields a feather duster, a tool this ex-soldier never would have expected to replace his spiked halberd. Inside the watchtower's cramped antechamber, the ex-soldier, Garrett Half-Shift Bradshaw, stands barefoot on a rough-hewn beam shoulders, hunched under the weight of shame. His woolen jerkin hangs loose, as if relieved to loosen its grip on a man unaccustomed to weakness. Moonlight filters through slatted shutters, casting striped patterns across his scarred boots, battle marks from skirmishes in distant borderlands. The constable's assistant, a stalwart youth with misshapen glasses and a resilient jaw, awaits with a goose-down feather duster, its handle carved by a local woodcarver into the shape of interlocking watchman shields. You recall that one mainstream historical fact states by the late 13th century CE, feudal lords replaced harsh corporal punishments for milder community-based alternatives for soldiers' minor infractions, especially when military discipline risked demoralizing rank and file. Historians still argue whether these substitutions upheld or eroded martial seriousness. But here, the feather duster stands in crisp counterpoint to broken oaths. Across from you, a small gathering of watchman villagers, and the ex-soldier's former comrades watches with a hush. A fringed tidbit drifts into your mind. Some old-timers swear that if a soldier is tickled under guard duty, moonlight, he emerges with a renewed sense of vigilance, as though the very act of laughter cracks open his war-weary heart. Whether that's gospel or gossip, it seems fitting that laughing at one's own folly can sharpen senses more than any whispered admonition. Garrett's cheeks are pale, his broad back taut with anticipation, an embodiment of crumpled pride clad in muted russet and indigo livery. The constable's assistant steps forward, measuring his voice. Garrett Bradshaw, on the eve of our harvest festival, you abandoned your post in the privy and left the tower unguarded, risking a bandit's easy raid. Garrett bows his head, shoulders sagging. I didn't think it'd matter. In the moon's soft glow, he mutters, voice ragged as chainmail. The assistant nods his own hand steady as he unfurls a small parchment scroll listing Garrett's watch failures. 3 watches missed. 3 chances to sound the alarm. Your pennant's 12 strokes of the goose-down duster across your ribs. Bare skin, no armor. So, you'll remember. Duty outweighs comfort. Gasps ripple through the onlookers. Many murmur appeals of mercy. Garrett's battlefield scars mark him as loyal once. But the constable's assistant offers no reprieve. Justice must be seen and felt, especially by those who carried sword for our realm. Replace steel duress with softer consequence. Let laughter mend heedless hearts. He hands Garrett a linen cloth, instructing him to shed his jerkin. The ex-soldier wrestles it free, revealing arms corded with muscle and faded tattoos of far-off regiments. Under his shirt's hem, a jagged scar traces a silvered line across his right flank, relic of a long-ago skirmish. Now that flank will brace Goose down. Garrett slips off his boots, each heavy step echoing on the wooden beam toes, tanning to mature leather against the worn planks. The assistant picks up the goose down duster, its plumes recently sheared, scented faintly of lavender and evening breeze. He dips the quills in a jar of cold spring water laced with mint to soothe ticklish burns yet to come. You recall Theodore the friar's whispered counsel, mint-soaked plumes quell leftover sting. Another fringe tidbit reinforcing that the community balances justice with compassion. You watch the constable's assistant's hand steady as he plants the feather's tip beneath Garrett's left rib cage. A hush thickens as though the tower's stones are holding breath. The first stroke brushes Garrett's skin, a whispery glide that tickles the nerve endings like a silk caress gone rogue. Garrett's shoulders jolt an involuntary recoil, engineered by Goose Down's dance. He grunts, lips parted, then bites his lower lip to muffle what could swell into laughter. A soft chuckle escapes anyway, cleaving the hush in two. The assistant pauses, counting aloud in a low cadence. 1. That single breath of laughter ripples from Garrett's chest to the standing watchers, soldiers who once marched beside him, villagers who once shared his bread. The second stroke along his rib kindles a jolt of reflexive mirth. Garrett's torso stiffens as if bracing for incoming steel. Instead, he's met with a second tickle lance, sending him exhale and inhale in jerking succession. By the fifth stroke, he's shaking, trying to maintain a soldier's stoicism. But the ticklish impulses win. A boisterous laugh rips from his chest, sending a small flock of ravens perched beyond the tower's rafters flapping into the night breeze. The constable's assistant counts on 6, 7, 8, each digit a soft chime against Garrett's ribs. He clamps his fist over his mouth, trying to mute more laughter, but the absurdity overwhelms caution. His throat rumbles with laughter, a victim of his own blurting humor. Garrett's shoulders convulse, ribs jouncing beneath Goose Down's ruthless softness. The ninth stroke causes him to topple slightly, crouching into himself, arms wrapped around his midsection as if to barricade further tickle assaults. The assistant's final 3 strokes are deft, a dance of quills, pairing chastisement with empathy, ending on a gentle upward sweep like an elder's benediction. Garrett shakes his shoulders, his face flushed as crimson barley in scalding brew. The assistant steps back, lowering the duster with reverence. He offers Garrett a small cloak, rough wool, dyed to midnight blue, and Garrett drapes it over his bare shoulders, shivering as Goose Down breaths its final surrender. The constable's assistant raises a lantern higher, gilding the arch's carved wood in warm luminescence. He addresses Garrett in a tone that blends firmness with fellowship. Learn this soldier, whether serving crown or community watch, never sleeps. Let this laughter be a sentinel's lesson. Let no moon's comfort eclipse your duty. The onlookers exhale collectively, a wind of relief drawn from shared compassion. In this hush, you sense how I've woven trials bind souls together. Laughter's echo bridges soldiers' valor with villagers' trust. You glance at Garrett's face, eyes glisten as if reflecting ghostly watchfires. He steps forward, bending to clasp the assistant's hand in honest gratitude. The constable's assistant returns the clasp, nodding, a bond forged through Goose Down instead of hollow oaths. Garrett's friends, old soldiers now turned millers and smiths, rise to clap in reluctant applause, knowing this punishment's strange kindness may save lives more than if bruises were hewn by steel. As the gathering disperses, you notice the watchtower's ancient timbers, each scar and knot, narrating days when brute weight kept watch. Tonight, giggles infuse those beams with a different legacy, one woven of compassion. The constable's assistant reloads his duster in a small chest propped by the stairwell. He whispers to Garrett, "May you guard again with feathers of light and heart unburdened." Garrett lifts his chin, tossing the midnight blue cloak's folds aside. He offers a small wry salute, half soldier's honor, half comedic knee nudge, before descending the spiral stairs one measured step at a time, returning to the village's quiet watch. You step into the chill of the night air, the river's lullaby drifting up in silver threads. You recall Garrett's laughter echoing as the ravens wheeled overhead, an unorthodox symphony of bird call and human mirth. You sense that if midnight beckons again, Garrett's watch will be sharper, his resolve cemented by that hour of quills and goose down. Instead of bitter resentment or shameful exile, he walks forward with lighter steps, cradled by the village's forgiveness. Ahead, the watchtower's window glows a faint ember of candlelight, and you trudge toward the inviting bounce of the next storyline, perhaps a baker's son found selling stale bread to cattle, or a pious widow, ignoring fiefdom taxes. Whatever comes, you know that the constable's assistant will brandish his feather duster once more, a tool agile as pen in shaping lives at dawn and dusk. You smile, recalling the night's echo of laughter, a soldier's rebellion dissolved by a goose duster's grace. In a world where iron and blood once wrote justice here, a plume's whisper holds sway, stitching missteps into communal harmony, one ticklish sigh at a time. You slip out of the watchtower's lingering warmth into a moonlit lane lined with half-timbered cottages, the scent of baked bread still wafting from the bakery at its end. Tonight, the full moon, a silver lantern in the sky, casts elongated shadows that dance across cobblestones as though the village itself moves in hushed anticipation. This lane leads to the bakery of Petra Krusty Humabanek, where just days ago her daughter Annalise staged a porridge prank that has become the stuff of local legend, an act of melodramatic justice against a gossiping seamstress. You recall the seamstress's whispered slander that Annalise's porridge was so bland it could rival hospital gruel. Now, Annalise faces her prime lesson, 6 strokes of goose down plumes along her hips. Feathers chosen because goose down like porridge is soft, yet capable of stirring unexpected sensations. One mainstream historical fact: medieval bakers often acted as informal arbiters in their communities, leveraging their daily hearth gatherings to settle petty disputes. By the 14th century, C.E. Baker's Guild records note that porridge-related fines and counter-misdemeanors were more common than one might expect. Historians still argue whether these culinary penalties were genuine social deterrents or simply theatrical gestures to maintain solidarity. But this night, you'll witness how a single spoonful of revenge can ripple through community bonds. You approach the bakery's wide doorway, an arch of weathered oak embellished with carved wheat sheaves, Through the open door, Annalise stands barefoot on a wooden bench, tense and trembling under a woolen shift dyed a muted saffron hue. Her silhouette, backlit by the hearth's flickering embers, is a study in contained dread. Across from her, Petra stands arms folded, wearing an apron still dusted with flour. She surveys her daughter with a soft mixture of pride and stern maternal resolve. After all, this is a momentous rite tonight. Annalise will learn when mischief betrays kindness. On a bench next to the hearth, the constable's assistant sits with the designated goose-down duster, its quills plucked fresh from this summer's brood of geese. He dips the plumes into a basin of warm, lavender-scented water. Lavender, it's said, soothes the sting and leaves behind a calming fragrance, an idea borrowed from old wife's remedies and supported by one fringe tidbit that lavender-infused feathers can lull miscreants into a more reflective state. The seamstress Agnes, sharp-tongued Pinfold, watches from the corner with folded arms, lips twisted in a mix of smugness and curiosity. She is clad in a russet kirtle and holds a small iron spoon, her instrument of gossip, and now a mute reminder of her own broadside. Annalise's transgression occurred at dawn, 5 days prior. Agnes had intercepted Petra's gift of warm porridge sweetened with honey and crowned with cinnamon, and told the baker's patrons that it was no more than watery swill unworthy of artisan hands. Word spread like spilled grain. Soft, poor girl serves hollow broth, they said. Determined to reclaim her reputation, Annalise composed her own bowl. She spooned thick, barley-laden porridge into a copper cauldron, stirred in sage and a dash of pepper, then clandestinely slid it to Agnes's doorstep at midnight. When Agnes licked her spoon at first light, expecting a bland bite, she instead tasted the fierce heat of pepper, enough to set her cheeks aflame and her eyes to water like a spring without end. The prank's poetic justice flew through town. The seamstress, esteemed for her needlework, now hobbling to cool her tongue, had earned the community's hilarity and sympathy for Annalise. Yet permission to prank did not absolve the daughter from her own breach. She'd skirted the unwritten courtesy of direct conversation, and now her comeuppance would be measured in goose down. Master Petra's voice, gentle yet firm, breaks the hush. Annalise, step forward and present yourself for penance. You've brought laughter, but also flared tempers. Now you must accept your share of mirth and humility. The goose-down duster hovers as Annalise climbs onto the bench, her knees wobbling. She exhales a breath heavy with anticipation. The tavern's earlier laughter still rings in her mind. I understand, she whispers, bobbing her head. Agnes stands beside Petra, arms akimbo, her eyes bright with triumph. Tonight, she too will face the duster's gentle reminder, but of a different kind. The constable's assistant paces boots, creaking on the wooden floor. He addresses Annalise, 6 strokes, child, to match your 6 spoonfuls of pepper-laced porridge. We begin with your left hip, bare the flesh. Annalise's cheeks burn. She pulls the hem of her shift upward, revealing pale skin dotted with faint freckles. She shivers as the assistant's hand descends. The first goose-down stroke light as a whisper skims across her hip, eliciting a soft gasp. A flicker of goosebumps ripples in its wake. The second stroke follows a splendid hush, swallowing the crackle of the hearth. Annalise's shoulders arch forward, a breath hitch as delicate as a wren's call. By the third stroke, a ripple of laughter, deft tender bubbles from her lips, scattering into the bakery's rafters. The constable's assistant counts steadily. 4. The fourth stroke sends her thighs twitching, a tiny giggle blooming like a summer rose. The crowd villagers and patrons clustered close lean forward. Even the bread loaves on the wooden rack seem to tremble with anticipation. The fifth stroke lands each goose quill now soaked with lavender, gliding with soothing intent, and Annalise's laughter multiplies a tinkling melody that unspools tension like wind through chaff. On the sixth, the plume pauses momentarily, tracing a gentle arc, then descends with a flourish, her laughter blossoming into full bloom, echoing off the stone walls. As Annalise bows and readjusts her shift, wiping tears of mirth from her cheeks, she meets Agnes's eyes. Now it's Agnes's turn. The seamstress steps forward, her russet kirtle rustling like a page turning. She sets aside her iron spoon, the vessel of her earlier scorn, and curls her fingers tightly. The constable's assistant offers her a smaller goose-down duster, rimmed with violet tips, a nod to the seamstress's skilled fingertips. 4 strokes across your palms, he intones one for each day your words, scorched sweet porridge. Agnes exhales, extending her right palm to the duster. The first stroke hovers a soft caress, a stark contrast to her coarse words. She flinches, puckering, as goose down tickles beneath her wrist. The second stroke glides along her palm's arch, and a reluctant giggle escapes her lips, surprising even herself. The third stroke, cat's whisker, tingling across her left palm, robs her of stoic calm. Her shoulders quiver as laughter erupts, hushed at first, then more robust. The fourth and final stroke sweeps in, brushing her fingertips. Agnes's laughter peals clear as a water nymph, resonating through the bakery's hearth. The villagers cheer not in victory over an enemy, but in communal refreshment, a celebration that mercy can be delivered on feathers. As Agnes collapses into a nearby stool, she offers a small smile to Annalise, 2 girls bound by the same circle of penance and laughter. The constable's assistant steps back, lilting the feathery tools like twin wands of compassion. Master Petra places a hand on both women's shoulders, her eyes glistening with pride and relief. May this remind us to weigh our words as carefully as we stir our porridge, she says. You thread through the departing crowd warmth, suffusing your cheeks from the laughter you helped witness. The aroma of sweet dough and moonlit lavender mingles as villagers disperse to their homes, heads held a bit higher, hearts a bit lighter. You pause beneath a hanging sign that depicts a steaming bowl of porridge and a dancing goose Ravensweir's bakery and Feather Penance Hall, an emblem of how kindness and correction can blend. Ahead, a lone owl perches on a crooked signpost, its soft hoot punctuating the night. You sense the pranks and penances alight beneath its watchful gaze. Soon, you'll wander on toward the next village where a blacksmith's apprentice awaits an equal and opposite punishment, perhaps 6 duck feather strokes along his hidden ribs for absconding with horseshoes. Each hamlet's ritual unique, yet threaded by the same gleeful correction. And in these moonlit streets, you realize every misstep is a chance to knead community tight again. One feathered stroke, one giggle, one shared sigh at a time. You slip away from Ravenswear's lingering echoes, laughter still rippling down moonlit lanes to the outbuildings where forge fires glow like embers in the night. The clang of hammer on anvil reverberates a heartbeat of iron shaping iron. Here stands Bramwell Shanksmith Corbin, the blacksmith's apprentice, barefoot on a tattered burlap sack, muscular arms still rippling from days of hoisting heated bar stock. His sin-pirating horseshoes under cover of dusk to craft a surety of easy coin. In a village dependent on sturdy hooves, stolen shoes spell hoof damage and bitter curses. Tonight, he faces a hushed verdict. 8 strokes of a duck feather duster along his wine-colored shins, ducks chosen because their feathers, though softer than goose, carry a whisper of dampness that stings like a blunt admonition. One mainstream historical fact by the 12th century CE medieval guilds endorsed corporal dance with feathers rather than iron rods to discipline apprentices, believing that feathered penance preserved the body for future work. Historians still argue whether such feathered disciplines fortified loyalty or bred quiet resentment. Here, the ritual stitching of community trust will unravel before your eyes. Torchlight flickers across Bramwell's shirtless back, rippling shadows through the smoke-scented air. The blacksmith Master Hallward stands broad-shouldered with arms crossed, ash smudging his soot-dark beard. His workshop glows ringed in iron tools, hammers hung like soldiers at attention, tongs clamped on a rack, and a stack of horseshoes glinting on a wooden bench. Yet tonight, those irons feel cold as betrayal. A fringed tidbit drifts in. Legend says duck feathers, when dipped in brine before penance, carry a saline sting that mimics nagging regret. Whether myth or truth, villagers swear by the brined quill's accuracy. Bramwell's gaze flickers, fear and defiance locked in his pale eyes. His shins already gleam with a sheen of perspiration. Hallward's voice, heavy as molten steel, breaks the hush. Bramwell Corbin, you absconded with 8 sets of horseshoes, damaging at least 3 colts before they limped home. In this forge, that's treachery to our craft and community. Your penance, 8 strokes of the duck feather duster, one complete for each shoe stolen. Bare your shins. Bramwell swallows. His thigh muscles twitch. He glances at the anvil, his sanctuary turned stage of reprisal, and bows a soldier kneeling before fate. The constable's assistant kneels, selecting feathers plucked from a drake's breast, their russet barbs flecked with dawn's pallor. He dips them in a shallow dish of cold water, laced with brine sea salt, to prick the membrane and lavender, to soothe sting, preparing the quills for work. Bramwell steadies himself against a stack of iron bars. The first stroke lands below his right knee. The feather's damp quills whisper along muscle-igniting nerve ends that snatch breath from his lungs. A silent grimace, and he tenses, a sculpture clinging to composure. The second stroke slips along his calf. His calf muscles twitch, hamstrings tightening like coiled springs. A soft exhale escapes him, betraying all defiance. The constable's assistant counts in a low monotone 3. By the third and fourth strokes, Bramwell's knees buckle slightly. His arms shiver as he grips the burlap. A stifled moan emerges as the feather skims upward, a tickle that veers toward a sting, each quill's quenched barbs whispering of salt and discipline. Villagers cluster in semicircle beyond the forge's glow cobblers, farmers, even the town fiddler, slowing his tune to watch. One woman's hands clasped to her chest offers Bramwell a wry smile, for she once confessed a missing calf tether. Her own penance arrived beneath goose feathers outside the granary. Now her face registers empathy. After all, this punishment transforms sorrowful crime into laughter's reckoning. A soft ripple of muttered prayers drifts, may he mend his ways as iron cools. Meanwhile, the blacksmith watches arm still crossed a single tear, catching torchlight before he blinks it away. He once forged Bramwell's future as apprentice. Tonight, every ticklish flick teaches a lesson more enduring than hot steel. The fifth stroke rakes across Bramwell's left shin. He jolts, legs bending, calves tighten as though about to sprint from shame. Onlookers shift, awed, sympathetic, amused in measured portion. The constable's assistant reminds him, steady apprentice, 1 to learn, 7 to remember. By the sixth, Bramwell begins to laugh, first as a cough, then as a laugh pure as a meadow stream. The tension unravels, muscle knots loosen. A relieved sigh escapes him, mingling with the forge's crackle. The seventh stroke dances upward near his kneecap. He convulses with rhythmic laughter that merges seamlessly with the anvil's distant ring. The eighth and final stroke comes swift light as a moth's wing, eliciting a final burst of laughter that resounds as though cathedral bells chiming midnight. Bramwell collapses onto straw bales, strewn by his comrades, racked by laughter that outlasts the tickle. The constable's assistant tucks away the brined quills, mission accomplished. As Bramwell wipes tears from his eyes, Hallward steps forward. Take a moment to breathe, son. Let that laughter remind you dishonesty hurts more than any blow. Be the craftsman you dreamed of, iron's honesty, not stolen iron's deceit. He lays a hand on Bramwell's sweat-slick shoulder. The apprentice lifts his head, nodding eyes bright with new-found resolve. You turn from the coals, moving toward the stable where the next penance awaits. Outside, a group of stable hands uncouple hobbled colts, murmuring of Bramwell's ordeal. One remarks, duck feathers on bare shins, perhaps milder than iron, but memory jams deeper. Another jokes about fleas gnawing at the duck's quills, binding, sting, and itch. Bramwell simply grins as though already picturing his reformed future horses reshod by his honest hand. The night air shivers as you cross the stable threshold, aromatics of straw horse sweat and fresh hay. Beyond the stalls, you spot a young farmer. Cuthbert knuckles soft haze, spaces his hooves uncertainly. He's reputed for his gentle touch on livestock. Yet last night, emboldened by mead, he kickshawed a neighbor's pig, an act of reckless bravado that left the hog wallowing in pride rather than pen. His penalty, 4 strokes of the peacock feather duster across his palms, peacock feathers chosen for their fineness and cosmic questionings were rumored to invoke a vision of one's own arrogance. Tonight, horse-turned punishment will shape kindness anew. The constable's assistant retrieves the peacock plumes from a hollowed oak box, the quill's iridescent eye tips glimmering emerald and sapphire in torchlight. Cuthbert extends his palms. The first plum stroke elicits a sweet sting, like a dream's caress that stings when it fades. A low gasp escapes his lips. The second feather flicks upward. The feather's swirling eye patterns momentarily hypnotize his senses, and a wry chuckle slides out. The third stroke along the outside of his left palm flickers goosebump icicles along his wrist. He laughs with the pleasant surprise of childhood. By the fourth, Cuthbert's eyes sparkle, as if discovering his hands anew, hands that once slapped at life's chores, now savoring soft admonishment. You recall a fringed tidbit some villagers believed if one peered into a peacock feather's eye during penance, one could glimpse one's future misdeeds as specters. Whether fanciful or real, it added mythic spice to each stroke. As the plumes retreat, Cuthbert rubs his palms, wincing at residual tingles. The constable's assistant claps him gently on the shoulder, imparting a silent solidarity. May your gentle hands mend more than they maim. From the stable, you wander into the cart path, passing a pair of weavers, untangling warped threads by the wheel. They nod as you pass. Earlier this week, one of them received a feathered penance for selling woven scraps as new yards peacock feathers across knuckles, twisting fingers to remind them that honesty weaves trustable cloth. Each step you take echoes with a symphony of feather-dusted souls. Apprentices, farmers, weavers, all bearing goose, duck, or peacock feather bristles that taught lessons deeper than iron rods ever could. Ahead, you glimpse the next scene, the apothecary's shady courtyard, where a standoff herbalist awaits his penance. He sold poisonous hemlock root, mislabeled as mint for tea. His stone bench under a spiral rose arbor will soon host a session of quail feather strokes across his collarbone feathers, small and swift, symbolizing nimble tongues and misleading words. The constable's assistant stands ready, a gentle lantern illuminating the walkway. He'll administer a penance to ensure this herb seller's future wears soothe rather than sicken. As you move on, the night's hush settles around you like a comforting cloak. The forge's embers flicker one last time in your memory. The stable's soft hay smell halfway to dreams, and the parable of duck and peacock feather penances inscribed on every heart. You recall scholars debating whether such feathery disciplines were mere whispers of pity or echoes of truly transformative justice. Yet, in each hush of laughter or shudder of remorse, you sense that this village's secret lies not in steel or scorn, but in the soft, persistent coaxing of feathers. You step beyond torchlight into the moon's gentle embrace, its rays painting the fields of barley in ghostly silver ripples. Every footstep carries the feathered imprints of the night's penances, a soldier's shins, a smith's shuddering calves, a farmer's roaring laughter, a student's slackened hands. And as the cool breeze carries the distant trill of a nightingale, you carry forward this lesson of featherlight, as a whisper can wield the weight of wisdom, mending missteps, in laughter's name stitching souls back into the community's tapestry with each gentle stroke. You slip through the apothecary's low copper gate into a courtyard scented thick with lavender and tansy, the night's chill tempered by the phosphorescent glow of moonlight bouncing off glazed herb jars lining the walls. The apothecary himself, Bramwort Bender Petty, stands barefoot on a mosaic of crushed peppermint leaves laid out in a circular pattern, a makeshift ring of virtue locals say to ward off misfortune. Bram's linen jerkin hangs loose patches of dark soil marking his robe from hours spent tending root beds under starlight. Word is that, in a misguided attempt to boost profit, he sold hemlock root masquerading as mint to a traveling noble's household, resulting in mild poisoning rather than a soothing nightcap. Now, under the moon's silent gaze, he faces his penance, 10 strokes of a quail feather duster along his collarbone, chosen because quail feathers soft yet sharp at the tips mirror the thin line between healing and harm. One mainstream historical fact by the 13th century CE apothecaries were often held accountable by local guild councils, and fines or corporal penances were common for dispensing misidentified herbs. Historians still argue whether such communal punishments deterred malpractice or merely served as theatrical moral lessons. But tonight, you'll see the quills whisper replace the iron gauntlet. Bram's eyes flicker with remorse, his calm facade cracking like brittle twigs. You recall the murmur that spread through town when Lady Merwin's servants delivered the spurious mint tea. She awoke briefly with trembling lips, mistaking his wort for a restful draught. Only quick antidotes from a neighboring healer spared her from a deeper sleep in death's arms. The scandal ricocheted from manor to marketplace, and Bram's reputation sowed cautious distrust among villagers who once sought his tinctures for coughs and fevers. Now standing in the courtyard's hush, Bram's shoulders slump as though the lapels of his jerkin could lift the weight of 1,000 regrets. His wife Mabel, a woman whose hands once brewed lavender oils and honey lozenges, stands beside him, arms folded, eyes bright with tearful admonishment. One fringe tidbit drifts in some apothecary lore held that quail feather penances could reveal hidden impurities in one's spirit, an idea that Bram's quivering stance gives greater credence to. The constable's assistant steps forward from a ring of gathered villagers, farmers returning from late fields, tavern keepers doubling as watchers, and a handful of weavers finishing looms. He carries a bundle of quail feathers tied with a simple raffia cord, each plume slender and pale as moonlit straw. The assistant addresses Bram Petty for selling hemlock root as mint, and endangering Lady Merwin's life, you owe penance to this community. 10 strokes across your collarbone, where each feather reminds you that healing can slip into harm if wisdom wanes. Bram inhales a shuddering breath, nods and nods again, his head dipping so low that the courtyard's moonbeams outline the curve of his scalp. Mabel presses a pale hand to her mouth, tears tracing muddy tracks down her cheeks, while Bram loosens his jerkin straps. He reveals a collarbone paling with cold tension, the dip between neck and shoulder, a terrain of guilt and dread. You feel the courtyard's collective heartbeat, a hush that hushes the chirp of crickets and muffles the distant bubbling of a well. The assistant dips a quail feather into a clay bowl of cool well water scented with chamomile, a soothing touch to balance the impending sting. He holds the first quill beneath Bram's left collarbone, a soft caress, more whisper than brush, sending an almost imperceptible chill across warm skin. The first stroke is quiet, barely more than a breath on parchment. Bram's exhale catches mid-throat as he braces. The second follows, tracking along the clavicle's ridge with a ticklish edge that provokes an involuntary shudder. By the third, a faint hitch of breath audibly escapes Bram's lips, a subtle tremor rippling through his shoulders. The villagers lean forward, the innkeeper clutching his apron corner, the weavers still on their benches, ears pricked like hounds, tracking a whispered sound. The assistant's voice murmurs the count 4, and the fourth stroke delivered with gentle precision, skims beneath Bram's neck, its pale tip dancing a careful tango that demands both composure and humility. On the fifth stroke, Bram's head tips back, his throat muscles tightening as he swallows a sound of pain, part choke sob, part chuckle of surprise. The sixth, tracing closer to his throat, causes him to gasp, shoulders jerking under the moonlight's watchful eye. His eyes squeeze shut, a single teardrop escaping from the left orb, sparkling like a dewdrop on a petal. The assistant's hand remains steady, each movement a conversation between mercy and discipline. 7, he intones. Bram's chin lifts, revealing shoulders damp with sweat, each bead catching torches flicker. He might well be forging his own humility in the hearth's reflection. The seventh stroke, softer yet deliberate, skims over the hollow of Bram's throat, accentuating every nerve ending. Bram's lips tremble, releasing a ragged breath, sovereign and freeing. Around you, a hush sighs through the crowd, grief for the near making of tragedy, relief that Mabel is safe, and awe that Bram remains standing, a testament to the quail duster's paradoxical power to sustain body and spirit. The constable's assistant leans in, cradling Bram's shoulders, sending a message: "We are with you, though you must walk this path alone." The eighth stroke travels along the right collarbone. Bram's right hand sneaks up to brace against his chest, fingers grazing tender flesh. The ninth brush flutters at the collar's curve, and Bram's head falls forward, eyes glimmering with raw recognition, an epiphany that words alone could not name. The final 10th stroke comes as a feather-like kiss, a whisper against his sodden skin, an ending more tender than beginning. Bram's tears fall freely now, and he exhales in surrender, surrender to accountability, surrender to the fact his own craft nearly failed a noble life. As Bram steps away from the ark of penance, the constable's assistant remands the quail duster to a leather sheath, selecting it as both a tool of correction and a salve for conscience. Bram reaches for his linen jerkin, tugging it on slowly as though draping himself anew in the village's trust. Mabel moves to his side, pressing a hand against his chest, her touch gentler than any feather. She whispers, "I still have faith in you." Bram nods, voice raw. "I will restore that faith, my heart heavier than any sin, yet lighter than my penance." You drift from the courtyard, passing the herb beds, where peppermint still waves in slumber. An old apothecary's ledger lies open on a mossy bench, a testament to Bram's trade, now smeared with shadow and moonlight. The villagers linger in murmured hush, some flipping coins for future curatives, others exchanging nods of relief that the night's lesson concludes. You recall that medieval apothecaries delivered both curative elixirs and justice in equal measure, a pinch of pennyroyal for a cough, a plume of quail for a moral cough. This evening's ritual embroidered communal well-being, each delicate stroke stitching trust between healer and healed. Beyond the gate, the moon flares brighter, its silver compass guiding you to the next penance, a huntsman rumored to have trapped his neighbor's hounds in snares. He awaits 4 swan feather strokes along his thigh swans, chosen for their regal bearing, each plume commanding honesty as a reflection of purity. You step down a path shadowed by yew trees, feeling Bram's labor echoing in your mind, a tale of caution, penned not in ink, but in laughter. Sob a reminder that compassion wields a feather's force equal to the blacksmith's hammer. Ahead, the courtyard path splits left to the stag lodge, where the huntsman girds his conscience right to the dye house, where next dawn's penance awaits a dyer found mixing arsenic for richer blacks. Tonight's tapestry of penance woven with quail and duck and goose and partridge and swan trails behind you in a living scroll of restored trust. The village perched between river and hillside breathes brass and brine, soot, and sage, each held in gentle balance by feathers born of communal mercy. You step into the hush of the next lane torches, flickering like fireflies carrying Bram's absolution in their glow. The scent of crushed peppermint drifts behind you, memory's final echo of the apothecary's courtyard. In the hush of the night, under the watchful moon shimmer, you carry Bram's lesson forward that a healer's misstep need not fall to iron gauntlets, but can be mended by goose-down kisses, quail's stinging grace, and the steady heartbeat of community choosing laughter over lament. And as you vanish into shadow, another feather stirs in the silence emblem of redemption, waiting to alight upon the next wandering soul. You trudge along a narrow trail carpeted with pine needles, the nocturnal hush pierced only by the occasional rustle of a nightjar stirring in the underbrush. Moonlight filters between tall firs, casting shifting patterns of silver and shadow upon the ground. The scent of damp earth mingles with the faint aroma of juniper berries, a sensory echo of the huntsman's illicit snares you passed moments ago. Ahead, a flickering lantern glows beside the entrance to the stag lodge, a modest timber building swathed in creeping ivy, adorned with antler trophies of hunts long past. Here stands Edric Bloodquill Renford, once famed for tracking boar and stag through these woods. Tonight, he faces penance beneath the same roof he once regarded as sanctuary. Off to one side, two hounds lie tethered, sides heaving in mild panic behind wooden shutters. Their muzzles press against the bars, eyes pleading. You hear their soft whine, a mournful note that ripples your heart. These are the neighbor's hounds, loyal companions turned pawns in Edric's gambit. Rumors spread that he coveted his neighbor's land, and so he set snares to trap the hounds under moonlight. They returned with wounded legs, limping home as if pleading for justice. Now, Edric will face 4 strokes of a swan feather duster along his thighs, chosen because swan feathers, large and resplendent, carry both regal dignity and weighty admonition. One mainstream historical fact by the 12th century CE hunting lodges often served as local courts of customary justice, where misdeeds against neighbors, especially those involving valuable hounds, were addressed on the spot. Historians still argue whether such lodges truly balanced communal law or simply enforced the huntsman's code at the huntsman's whim. But tonight, justice's measure will be counted in feathers, not daggers. As you near the stag lodge's open doorway, you glimpse Edric's silhouette framed by lantern light, broad-shouldered, clad in a russet jerkin patched with forest green leather, a belt heavy with worn pouches. His face, illuminated by flickering flame, is drawn tight with regret and defiance. With each exhale, the smoke-laden air curls around his jawline, highlighting the dark stubble. He seldom shaves, an outward sign of his inward turmoil. You step inside the wood floorboards creaking underfoot, and a hush settles across the circle of villages gathered farmers, trading tales of autumn plowing woodcutters with axes balanced like inert attendants, and the constable's assistant standing vigil, his arms folded across a chest he's tried to keep from heaving in sympathy. Among them, your eyes catch a flash of remembrance, the duck feather pennants that once drew Bramwell from a smoky forge, now echoed by the swan's soft admonition. Master Hallward the blacksmith stands near the hearth, his burlap gloves now replaced by a sober nod. He leans on a wooden spear, the one Edric once used to spear rabbits for stew. At the hearth side, a gilded antler crown glints. Tonight, it anchors a small brass bowl of holy water, an odd talisman recalling an ancient fringed tidbit that swan feathers dipped in consecrated spring water nullify male intent. Whatever the truth, the bowl's quiet presence reminds every soul that justice here melds the earthly and the divine. The constable's assistant retrieves the swan feather duster, a magnificent plumed instrument of penance, its quills large as owls' wings dipped in rose water to soften their tip. He bristles them with lavender oil, a gesture that legend says tempers remorse with calm reflection. Edric steps forward, each boot pressed into the pine needle carpet. He meets your gaze with hollow eyes. His sinewed thighs hum with anticipation. The constable's assistant clears his throat. Edric Renford, you trapped your neighbor's hounds in snares laid beneath moonlight. Those hounds are not mere beasts. They are kin guardians of hearth and home. Tonight, you atone with 4 strokes of this swan feather duster on each thigh, a total of 8 to honor 8 paws you betrayed. Bare your thighs. Edric's breath hitches. He nods, resting one hand on his belt buckle, an ancestral trinket once used to ward off staghorns. He unlaces his leather boots, setting them aside. The gathered villagers lean closer, their torches gleaming in impromptu rows like mixed guards at vigil. On the hearth wall, antlers cast ghostly shadows that dance as if alive. The night's hush crackles with tension as though these woods await a verdict. Edric slides off his woolen tights, revealing thighs bronzed by sun and scarred from past hunts, toned muscles sculpted by rivalry and reverence. He stands bare-limbed, regal as a tarnished knight, stripped of armor. The constable's assistant brings forward the swan feather duster, its plumes spreading like a soft fan of moonlight. The first stroke rests just above Edric's knee. The feathers wait, sending a tremor through sinew and skin. He inhales sharply, eyes closing, as the delicate tip glides a sensation at once gentle and insistent. The second stroke ascends along Edric's quadriceps. His muscles contract like drawn bowstrings, drawing a soft exhalation that mingles with whispered prayers from the watching villagers. One fringe notion flits by. Some hunters say swan feathers can unearth hidden courage, forcing truth from the deepest heart. As Edric quivers under feathers' waltz, you sense that kernel of truth blossoming. By the third stroke, Edric's back arches slightly. He exhales, a breath meant to steady himself, but laughter bubbles unexpectedly from his throat, a humor born of shock and humility. The constable's assistant's eyes hold steady, no cruelty in his countenance, only the firm resolve of someone shaped by many feathered penances past. The fourth stroke, tracing the line of Edric's hip, brings forth a wordless gasp, humiliation, and release entwined in a single breath. A soft, communal exhale passes among villagers. Many nod knowingly, as though each has felt that odd tickle of reproach and relief. With the first thigh half atoned, Edric lowers his shoulders a fraction, an unconscious bow of apology, not just to veiled hounds, but to all involved in night hunts and hearth joys. The assistant pauses, tilting the feather duster toward Edric's right thigh. The fifth stroke light as a lullaby's sigh skims beneath the hunting scar that traces Edric's triumphs over 3 seasons. His muscles contract reflexively, binding pride and pain in a sudden knot. The 6th stroke bounces at the curve of his hamstring. Edric's shoulders shake as suppressed laughter merges with stifled groan, echoing through rafters like claves of repentance. The hush deepens as if even the stag trophy on the wall holds its antlers in reverence. 7, the assistant murmurs, and that stroke at mid-thigh sparks a staccato rippling of ticklish anguish. Edric's breath halts, a quivering note trembling his lips. Then, 8, the final stroke skims near the groin's line, urging one last gasp of release. Edric staggers, but stands his ground, a silhouette of contradiction, one body labeled self-betrayer, now heart-forged anew. Arms extended, chest heaving, he absorbs the full weight of each moment, each feathered kiss, both chastening and cleansing. In the aftermath, Edric sinks to one knee, head bowed in raw humility. A hush lingers until Master Hallward's voice rumbles from behind. Rise, Edric Renford. Let this penance temper your soul as steel tempers fire. May your hounds run free, and may your hands honor life, not ensnare it. Edric lifts his head, tears glinting in the hearth's flicker. One mainstream historical fact, shimmering roused in your mind. Medieval huntsmen's punishments, often delivered in lodge courts, were believed to restore balance between man and nature, the feathered penance serving as both restitution and spiritual renewal. Historians still argue whether these practices truly rekindled respect for wildlife or merely sustained a veneer of civility. But tonight, Edric's bowed form speaks troves beyond parchment's debate. As Edric reclaims his jerkin and boots his gait slower but steadier, Mabel Renford, the huntsman's wife, emerges from the shadows, offering him a cloth dipped in cool well water. She dabs gentle circles on his thighs, murmuring soothing words. Through wet mist, Edric's face softens. Relief and resolve interlace in his gaze. He glances at the hounds, now gently nosing at their wounded paws, and offers a quiet vow. I shall tend them first at first light. You step outside the courtyard's door, closing with a hush. Beyond, the forest trail stretches in silver ribbons. Pine needles cushioned underfoot, the night's cool breath weaving through needles and ferns. You walk on feet, cradled by moss and moonbeams, carrying Edric's lesson in your mind that when man betrays hound, nature wavers. But when penance comes by swan feather's gentle rod, the heart rebinds with respect. Ahead lies the dye house, cloaked in ivy and last season's glory, where another miscreant awaits a weaver who traded truth for profit and now will feel the sting of peacock and owl feathers on his forearm. The quill and feather linger there, too ready to coax more humility from skilled hands. As you leave the stag lodge behind, the hound's soft whimper trails in your ears, a living testament that the community's laws extend beyond hearth doors. The path curves, leading you to next dusk's penance, each feathered blow, each ticklish sting, forging bonds of justice, wrought not by iron or bone, but by the gentle quills that weave stories of redemption in moonlit glade. In the weave of night's careful hush, you sense that each stroke of feather is also a stitch in the tapestry of trust, binding hunters, healers, smiths, and weavers in a shared pledge to keep the balance between man, beast, and community, one quill's whisper at a time. You step away from the stag lodge's somber hush, now entering a narrow alley where the dye house stands timber-framed, its walls plastered with fading swatches of crimson indigo and saffron cloth pinned like flags. The night's cool air carries faint whiffs of fermented bark safflower petals and vinegar used to set dyes. Here, under a lantern's pale glow, sits Alric color-twist Fenwick, the cloth dyer cross-legged on a wooden bench. His hands, once expert at coaxing vibrant hues, are bound with coarse hemp-rope wrists, taut above his head as he leans against the barrel of leftover madder root. His crime-selling, cheap matter-adulterated dye, labeled as pure indigo fouling townsfolk's cherished tunics, with a muddled purple that bled to crimson on their laundry lines. Tonight, he faces 6 strokes of a peacock feather duster along his forearms, chosen because peacock plumes resplendent with shimmering eyes are thought to reveal hidden deceit through their burdensome tickle. One mainstream historical fact by the 13th century CE dyers were often fined or penanced if their wares failed guild standards, with swatches of cloth tested by council elders before assessment. Historians still argue whether feathered pennants preserved artisans' livelihoods or humiliated craft pride. But here you'll see whether Alric's pride bends under peacock's plumes. Under the lantern's glow, Alric's jerkin, dyed a rich teal now marred by spots of shame, clings damply to his chest. His woolen hose, once a canvas of deep violet, now looks like bruised grapes. A fringed tidbit flutters in your mind. It's said that dipping peacock feathers in rose water before penance heightens sensitivity, as though perfume transforms conscience into conduit. Whether myth or method, the assistant's plumes glimmer faintly with residual floral moisture. The constable's assistant stands behind a low trestle table brandishing the peacock feather duster, its tall quills splaying like a fan of living jewels that catch firelight in purples and greens. Alric's shoulders tense. He lifts his head, eyes rimmed red, focusing on the plume's shifting pattern, almost as if seeking a portal to truth. The constable's assistant steps forward, voice low like a forging fire. Alric Fenwick, you passed off. Adulterated matter as pure indigo, defrauding neighbors and coloring their families' raiments with divisive hue. Tonight, you answer to 6 strokes of peacock feathers across your forearms, one for each bolt of cloth sullied. Present your arms. Alric nods, lips pressed together. The rope's rough fibers chafe his wrists. He shifts forward, placing each forearm atop a small wooden block carved from plane tree, its surface smooth from years of wood turning. One of the villagers, a weaver whose bolts bled red in lieu of royal blue, stands by to ensure every stroke achieves proper measure. He watches Alric's forearms, once the source of ingenious color, blends now the stage for penance. The first quill drops across Alric's right forearm. Its tip skims gently at first, producing a soft shiver that ripples under his sleeve. Alric's breath catches his knuckles whiten as he braces himself. The second stroke slides over mousy hair, sending goose bumps leaping like startled minnows. A hiss escapes Alric's teeth. The crowd leans in shadowed faces, ghost-like in fluttering torchlight. A hush falls, broken only by the rustle of creaking beams overhead. Two intones, the assistant counting each feathered kiss as though it were a prayer. Seekers of irony might note Alric's profession. His livelihood once lay in disguising imperfections, blending dyes to mask blandness. Tonight, he's laid bare his own hues, fading under feather's revelation. The third stroke stretches up to his elbow crease, eliciting a quiver of suppressed laughter that threatens to escape. A quiet chuckle betrays him, surprising both villagers and himself. It rises like an unbidden rhyme. The assistant's gaze flicks to the weaver next to him, who nods in tacit approval. Alric's mirth acknowledges his folly, a step toward rebuilding trust. The fourth stroke traverses Alric's left forearm. The plume's soft weight, scented with rosewater, feels almost like a lover's caress until they brush raw edges, sparking a dance of nerves. Alric's shoulders shake, each breath shallow, each exhalation a release from shame's grip. The weaver murmurs, "Hope you learned your lesson in color," and Alric's eyes flicker with understanding. The assistant's count continues. 4. By the fifth stroke, Alric's wrists lift involuntarily, his forearms buckling beneath the peacock's prismatic dance. He closes his eyes, laughter bubbling up a salve, smoothing the sting. The village elders watch, heads tilting, some grim, some half-smiling, at this moment of reconciliation. The sixth and final stroke arrives with delicate precision. The quill's arc glimmers like a wave cresting at break. Alric gasps, shoulders convulsing, and then stops abruptly. He catches his breath, detensing muscles as though muscles alone bore his crime's weight. As he lowers his arms, the rope is loosened. Villagers exchange nods of relief, acknowledging that feathered justice has its graceful sting. Alric runs a trembling hand along his forearms, surveying faint pink lines where feathers grazed, reminders of his misdeed, as transient as ink, yet as lasting as memory. He meets the weaver's gaze, who inclines his head, offering Alric a small leather satchel containing pure indigo dye as recompense, a gesture of restored trust. Draping his jerkin over his shoulders, Alric steps down from the bench as villagers scatter, some to clean dyed shawls of flame, with corrected blue others to share quiet remonstrations. The assistant folds the peacock duster, its quills fluttering to rest against its carved handle, each barbed tip now a testament to humility regained. "Let your hands dye truth from now on," the assistant intones to Alric. Alric nods, voice thick, "I will. No more false hues, only honesty in every bolt." You slip out from the dye house's threshold torches, flickering like playful spirits, and feel the night's tension ease like lye draining from vat. Ahead, you glimpse the weaver's cottage, where the final penitent awaits Matilda Songbird Weir, her crime having been a lullaby stolen from maidens. She sold fake lullaby scrolls that once sung wound up causing restless nights. Her feathered penance will be lent to the tiny hands of a child, teaching that a song's promise must never betray tender ears. Indeed, tonight's finale will dawn with partridge feather strokes across her shoulders. Partridge feathers, sturdy yet soft, known to kindle introspection with each tickled breath. Before you proceed, you inhale deep of the juniper-scented breeze, the village's heartbeat of restoration drifting upward as a hymn. The dye house recedes behind you, its walls a silent mosaic of lessons rendered in color and feather. Beyond the weaver's cottage stands humble smoke curling from its chimney as though carrying stories aloft. The penance awaits Matilda's final reckoning. By partridge's whisper, a gentle epilogue to a night punctuated by goose down, duck, quail, swan, and peacock's plumes, each bringing penance and redemption. The weaver's cottage door is ajar beyond which a child's lullaby flutters a tune Matilda once sold as an illicit promise. Soon partridge feathers will settle on her shoulders in 4 measured strokes, each one a reminder that songs like dyes and hounds and horseshoes carry weight beyond their softness. In the hush, you walk the threshold feeling the village's penances weaving a living tapestry, threads of misdeeds and feathers laughter and tears binding this night into dawn's tapestry of unity. Each stroke has been a stitch in the community's mended quilt, and tonight, with partridge's gentle grace, the final stitch awaits its place. You step across the threshold into the weaver's cottage, where a single lamp flickers on a rough-hewn table, illuminating skeins of tangled yarn in hues of marigold and eucalyptus. The air hums with the faint echo of a lullaby, a melody rendered hollow by Matilda's songbird Weir's betrayal. Tonight, Matilda sits on a low stool, back straight shoulders, bared her russet kirtle pooled around her waist. Her shoulders bear the ghost of a once sweet melody. She's sold lullaby scrolls promising peaceful slumber to mothers only to deliver twisted verses that left infants weeping through moonlit hours. Now, under the cottage's humble rafters, she faces 4 strokes of a partridge feather duster along her exposed shoulders. Partridge feathers chosen for their supple yet persistent tickle, believed to unearth hidden remorse. One mainstream historical fact: by the 14th century CE, itinerant minstrels and lullaby makers faced fines or corporal rituals if their compositions caused more distress than comfort. Historians still argue whether such communal chastisements preserved trust or simply punished those with lesser means. But here, Matilda's penance will be delivered in gentle quills, not harsh rods. Matilda's hands rest flat on her thighs, fingers trembling like autumn leaves in a soft breeze. Beside her, an array of folded swaddling cloths dyed in pastel tones lie stacked, a testament to mothers once coaxed into buying her scrolls. A fringed tidbit surfaces. Some nurses claimed that partridge feathers, when dipped in honey and dotted to bedtime, could calm restless babes, an ironic echo of Matilda's broken promises. The constable's assistant, clad in a charcoal jerkin, holds the partridge feather duster, its plumes moist with a tincture of lavender and elderflower to soothe sting. The small group of villagers, midwives, kitchen maids, and a single farmer whose child's nights she had tormented surrounds Matilda in a silent ring. Their faces glow in the lamplight, a mixture of sorrow, stern resolve, and a flicker of compassion that remains even when trust has been bruised. You recall how Matilda's lullabies once lulled infants to slumber under moonlit eaves, her voice soft as summer rain, weaving dreams of sugar-plum skies. That comfort turned cruel when your own cousin awoke, bathed in sweat, clutching a broken rattle, while her lullaby scroll lay torn at her bedside. Rumors spread swiftly Matilda's tune robbed sleep like a thief, they murmured. Now Matilda, who once sang sweetness for coin, stands stripped of melody and shivering under the lantern's glare. The constable's assistant sets the partridge duster on a small oak block, then gestures to Matilda. Present your shoulders. Songbird weir. For each mother's tear, your lullaby drew 4 strokes will remind you that words carry weight. Matilda exhales, nods, then slips her kirtle down, revealing skin pale as moonlight, dotted with faint freckles, a landscape plain but vulnerable. She tugs her braided hair forward, baring her neck and shoulders. The lamp's glow catches a trembling tear in her eye, reflecting a quiet regret. The first feather descends on her right shoulder, a gentle brush that sends a soft shiver through her spine. She inhales sharply, then exhales, as if readying herself for a long night's vigil. The crowd leans in. Even the hearth's crackle seems to hush. By the second stroke, Matilda's muscles contract beneath the feather's caress, her lips part, releasing a breathless stutter, a sound almost like an unbroken lament. The constable's assistant's quiet count reaches 2, each word measured as though the penance itself were a prayer. On her third, a flicker of laughter startled fragile bursts from Matilda's chest. She clamps her lips shut, cheeks coloring as though she glimpsed a memory of gentle lullabies rather than biting deception. The fourth and final stroke skims her left shoulder, its tip gliding in lavender-scented arcs. Matilda gasps, eyes fluttering, then closes them in a tremble of released laughter and tears mingling like dew on petals. The villagers exhale together, a collective sigh of absolution and admonition. As Matilda bows, recovering her kirtle, the constable's assistant folds the partridge duster, its quills, drifting dust motes that catch lamplight like drifting stars. A hush persists as Matilda Head bowed steps forward. One of the midwives' gray-haired Elswith, known for soothing babes with herbs, approaches with a small clay bowl of chamomile tea and a linen cloth. She offers it to Matilda drink child and wash away the residue of restless nights. Matilda accepts, hands trembling as she raises the bowl to her lips. Tea's warmth flooding her chest like a whispered promise. She sips slowly, tears mingling with the floral brew. A mother steps from the circle, a woman whose infant's cries once echoed through the night, now asleep, curled beneath a patchwork quilt. She holds out a lace-edged handkerchief, embroidered with tiny lambs and pale blues. May this remind you of gentler songs, she says softly, voice thick. Matilda nods, pressing the handkerchief to her lips, offering a whispered thank you that trembles but feels sincere. As you turn to leave, the lullaby's echo seems to settle in your mind. Tonight, the melody arrives not in Matilda's voice, but in the chorus of villagers bound by compassion stronger than indignation. The county's boundary may blur before dawn, but here, in this humble cottage, forgiveness takes the shape of partridge feather penance. You step into the pine-scented night, leaving behind the soft lamplight. Ahead, you glimpse low hills where morning's blush will rise. The hush of the weaver's lambent cottage follows you, a lullaby in and of itself. Each penitent's practice, a stitch in a broader garment of communal trust, threads you through memory and mercy. What began with feathered strokes now settles into a palette of second chances. Now, as your footfalls fade, you reflect on how tonight's rituals wove together mischief and mercy, a tapestry stitched by partridge, peacock, swan, quail, duck, and goose plumes. Each creature's feather-paraded penance, each stroke evoked laughter's catharsis or tears' release. Each penitent emerged, tempered, remade, ready to rejoin the fold. Rest now, friend. Let your breath uncoil softly like silk, unraveling from a spool as the final embers of this tale drift into the hushed night. Each feather's gentle touch, soft as a whisper, has mapped a journey through missteps and forgiveness, weaving your heart into a tapestry of communal grace. In the hush of this twilight, imagine your shoulders unburden the cushion of pine needles beneath you, and a gentle lullaby of leaves drifting on moonlit breeze. Allow these images to fill your mind: a cottage where partridge quills brushed away deceit, a forge silenced by laughter as duck feathers soothed the smith's guilty shins, swan plumes lauding healing where huntsman snares once strung pain, and peacock's proud quills dancing across dyer's arms to cleanse stained hues. Each scene, no matter how solemn or gleeful, becomes a brushstroke painting a new dawn, a dawn where feathered penance and communal harmony intertwine. In this quiet moment, feel the soft ripples of your own heartbeat syncing with the nocturnal chorus, the distant hoot of an owl, the sigh of a midnight breeze, and the whisper of feathers settling in soft snowdrifts. Each breath you draw is a chance to release every trace of tension, to let every syllable of judgment soften into understanding. For in these penance rituals, where laughter met tears, you witnessed the alchemy of repentance misdeeds, transmuted to lessons, cruelty, reformed into kindness, and fractured trust, sewn back with gentle thread. Your eyelids grow heavy as you imagine those penitent souls rising anew, Matilda with her honest lullaby on her tongue, Ulrich with arms destined to blend only true hues, Edric guided to kindness toward hounds, and all the rest woven into a village tapestry where feathers touch binds hearts. Tonight, know that these tales extend beyond cottage walls, and forge smoke they echo in the hush of every heart that cherishes second chances. So let the hush of night cradle you, inviting you into the embrace of sleep. Let dream wings soft as goose down carry you to realms where mistakes melt away and gentle forgiveness reigns. Remember that every whispered promise of dawn springs from the courage to undo harm with compassion's lightest touch. In your dreams, may you fly on phantom plumes, gliding above moonlit fields where every feathered stroke writes a new chapter of grace. Sleep now under cover of feather and starlight as the world hums its lullaby of redemption. The night holds you safe, the soft hush your guardian, until dawn's gentle rays steer you back to waking life, renewed, reformed, and forever touched by feather's mercy. End of script. Sweet dreams.